A long time ago, there was a blacksmith. He crafted weapons and armor, and he had a shop to sell his handmade metalwork. One day, the opportunity came to sell his weapons to the kingdom of Kiro, and the war became a chance for him to raise his status. When the conflict ended, he was granted the title of Baron. He is the owner of these lands and the father of Master Roman. The protagonist is listening to the story of his family, told by an old man. A mustached man wonders why he's listening to events that everyone already knows. A few hours earlier, Roman had discovered that he is the eldest son of the Dimitri family. He learns that he's in the kingdom of Kiro, located on the Salamander continent, and that a kingdom called Mirim doesn't exist. The mustached man wonders why he's acting so strangely, but he already knew Roman wasn't very bright. He fears the protagonist might be on drugs, since that's common among rich young men. He informs Roman that his fiancée, the lady from the Lawrence family, will be visiting. The protagonist spent 25 years locked in his room and is known as the Fool of the Dimitris, and he asks to see an old man who can teach him how to live here instead of preparing for the visit. The mustached servant doesn't understand the request, since Roman has always lived here but obeys, and that's why the protagonist is now listening to everything the old man knows about this world. The young man thanks the old man and says he will reward him for it, but the elder is already happy just to talk to him. Roman Dimitri is deep in thought, because in truth his name is Bat Jonghyuk from Mirim, and he lived a long and intense life there. In the end, he accepted his departure but woke up in the body of this young man. He wonders if this is a blessing or a curse for not accepting ascension. Something catches his attention. A fight can be heard happening somewhere else. A young man is being beaten viciously, and those who can see are shocked. A young man is lying on the ground at the market, and he's badly injured. The man who knocked him down is accompanied by others and insults him. He attacks his red-haired victim again, who is still on the ground and unable to defend himself. The mustached servant goes to see what's happening, and is shocked when he sees the fight, because on the arm of the violent man is a tattoo of Fang. Then he understands what's going on, and explains to his master, who is beside him, that they are the Bloodfangs. Roman doesn't know what that means. The man explains that they are criminals who lend money with enormous interest rates. They operate in Dimitri territory and in nearby areas. The fight must be about unpaid debt. He advises that they should stay unnoticed, but the young Dimitri is no longer listening. A shout echoes, telling them to stop, catching the criminal's attention. The chubby servant tries to stop his master, who is approaching the Bloodfangs. He's already close, when the violent leader recognizes him and calls out his name. And as he slowly approaches, he hears them say he's only doing this because he's a noble. The tattooed thug tells the protagonist to back off because that's the deal. The servant says they need to leave since this organization is cruel. Roman calls his servant Hans by name and orders him to explain how the laws of this place work. The protagonist asks who is actually in the wrong and what punishment is appropriate. The mustached man is startled, but he replies, the boy was deep in debt and couldn't pay, so he is in the wrong. But the Bloodfangs are not authorized to act on their own, and above all, they disrespected the eldest son of the Dimitri family, a crime that could cost them their lives. The criminals stare at Roman as he says that it wouldn't be strange if they were executed. Hans remains silent. Roman declares that they've broken the law of this land. He picks up a small branch from the ground and declares that he, the eldest son of Lord Romero Dimitri, will punish them. The tattooed man says he understands that Roman is a noble who doesn't know how the world works and tries to smooth talk him. He even tries to intimidate our protagonist, but Roman is certain of his judgment, and it leaves the muscular man confused. Roman says they're garbage for treating the owner of this land that way, and he charges to attack, saying he doesn't need to know anything else, surprising the criminals, who quickly arm themselves to retaliate. Blinded by rage, the Bloodfang lunges forward with a knife, but he can't attack our protagonist, and his eyes widen from a sudden strike. The red liquid gushes out. He was struck by a branch straight to the neck. With just a twig, the young man brought down his opponent. The others stare at the noble after the attack, and they charge at him in anger. Hans fears for his master. One of the criminals attacks with a blade, but the protagonist dodges it with ease. With that, his opponent loses balance, and Roman takes the opportunity to strike with his improvised weapon right into the stomach, shocking his servant, who wonders if this is truly Master Roman. When Bake opened his eyes in this world, what he saw was a will and drugs on the ground. He read that the kingdom was at war, and because of that, they forced one representative from each family to serve the realm. And when Roman was summoned to the army, he got scared and took his own life. It was a pathetic life, but now that's over, because the owner of this body is the leader of the heavenly demon sect, Bake Jonghyuk, and he will live life his own way now. And now the men from the Bloodfang gang are all badly injured and lying on the ground. A trembling voice threatens to scream, and yells that he is a monster. The man who screams runs away in desperation. Roman grabs him by the hair. The man then begs him to let go, but on his knees, he screams in pain, and in the name of the law, he must be punished, but this time not with his life. The protagonist states that his crime was speaking with cruelty. He screams once again and receives his punishment. And he will never scream again, not even speak, without his tongue. To the shocked citizens, he says his name is Roman Dimitri, and that anyone who disliked the punishment he delivered can come confront him. In his past life, Baek Jong-hyuk rose to the peak of Murem with overwhelming power. Thousands of martial artists challenged him and lost, and the red liquid that spilled from them formed a river, and the world acknowledged that the heavenly demon sect ruled Murem. But now he is in Roman's body, and though he may have defeated those delinquents, he had to exert a lot of effort. The protagonist calls Hans and asks him to summon the guards to investigate what happened there. The servant agrees, trembling from what he had just witnessed. As his subordinate runs to fetch the guards, the young Dimitri looks at his hands and sees how this body is useless and holds very little ki. Baek plans to quickly gather information and strengthen his body, but is called upon. The red-haired young man stands injured behind the protagonist and thanks him for saving him. Roman says calmly that he didn't actually do it for him, but that he only punished the Bloodfangs for breaking the law, and that the young man should also explain himself without telling any lies. The young man lowers his head, thinking. He understands and begins to explain. His parents borrowed money from the Bloodfangs to buy land to farm, and they would have been able to repay it with the harvest profits. The young man begins to grow angry as he tells the story. He reveals that the criminals themselves destroyed all the crops, and because of that, they had no way to repay the debt. The red-haired youth clenches his fists as he recounts that he later discovered they did it because they were after his younger sister. He falls to his knees, outraged by the injustice, since even though they were poor, they never bothered anyone, and he pleads with tears in his eyes for Roman to save his little sister. Our protagonist notices the eyes of the poor youth, and it seems like he's staring into the eyes of the Mad Demon, one of the 4 heavenly kings. Looking around, he realizes he met the Mad Demon in a place like this. Roman asks for his name, and the young man replies that it is Kevin. Our protagonist turns away, stating that he will check whether what he said is true, and that what happened today will be resolved. And already at a distance, he hears Kevin shouting his thanks, and Roman senses that the two of them will have a long connection. A carriage is passing by, and a servant tells Lady Flora that they will soon arrive at the Dimitri estate. A young blonde woman says she understands. Soon Lady Flora will meet Roman Dimitri. A month ago, she received the news of her arranged marriage and was outraged. Her father reminded her that their lands were in poor condition, and that this marriage was the only solution to overcome that disaster. She couldn't believe her marriage had been decided like this. And worse, she would have to marry a Dimitri, whose family was full of minors. Flora tries to argue with her father, but he interrupts her. He says he is truly sorry and blames himself for making this decision. And now the young blonde woman has just arrived in Dimitri lands. A servant helps her down, while she thinks it could have at least been the second son, who has a bright future ahead of him. She enters the mansion thinking that not even that she would have, and she sees Roman Dimitri, the eldest son who forced her to marry him. She scowls, thinking he is the fool of the Dimitris who lives only for luxury and fun. She wonders why they use so much perfume, and although she doesn't know much about the situation in her own land, Lady Flora sees that Roman may not be all that, and the young lady intends to tell him that today. As she passes by him, she turns around and says she wants to cancel the marriage, and our protagonist agrees with a smile, saying that it's fine by him. This leaves the beautiful blonde in shock, and Roman says he knows his reputation and that it would be bold of him to marry her, so it's more appropriate to cancel it. Flora wonders what has come over him, and if he's really himself. Our protagonist walks off saying that since this is an important matter, he will inform his father immediately, but the lady asks him to wait. He stops and asks her if something's wrong, and the young blonde says she heard that this was happening because he wanted it, and now she says she's confused. Roman then asks if she wants to marry him, and she says no. He resumes walking toward his father. After all, they are in agreement, and says he will take responsibility for breaking off the engagement. Our protagonist says that for him, already known as a fool, it won't make a difference to be called a divorcee. The lady is stunned by Roman and wonders what's gotten into him, and she wonders if he's really the fool of the Dimitris. He enters his father's office and closes the door. The father yells, outraged, asking what he's saying, and the young man says he wants to end the engagement and has already spoken to the lady from the Lawrence family. Lord Romero Dimitri screams that he's stupid, and even though his reputation is bad, he always tried to provide a good home for his son. The marriage was the only way to secure his nobility, and that he can't even marry a young, beautiful blonde woman that he himself wanted, and Roman apologizes. The father angrily grabs a glass from the table and throws it at his son's head, asking if he thinks an apology can fix everything. He says that now he won't be able to intervene, and Roman will be summoned to battle in 6 months. The father asks if Roman has anything to say about it. Roman says no, and the father keeps yelling, now saying he heard that Roman had problems with the Bloodfangs and doesn't believe he punished them. The Lord says that's a problem because not even he can do anything against that criminal organization, and that Roman will be responsible for his own problems. The father tells Roman that he'll have to deal with it and won't receive any help. The Lord expected him to beg for mercy, but his son says he understands, and with a wound on his head from his father's attack, our protagonist states that he'll handle it. Lord Romero is shocked as his son takes responsibility for his actions and reaffirms that he'll deal with it. Roman leaves the room with dignity, saying he'll return when everything is resolved, and leaves his father stunned, calling after him to wait. Outside the office, the protagonist closes the door. He pulls a handkerchief from his clothes and wipes the wound on his forehead, and hears someone asking if he's insane. Roman is caught off guard by Lady Flora, who is still there. The young blonde gets flustered, saying how dangerous the Bloodfangs are, and that they even terrorize nobles, and that if this organization thinks he's bothered them, they'll do anything to get revenge, and she asks what our protagonist plans to do without his family's help. The lady says it's okay to tell the truth and that he should go back and ask for mercy. The young Dimitri asks why he should do that. Flora says she already told him, and he interrupts her, saying that she doesn't know her place. It cuts to moments earlier, with Roman saying that the perfume his servant sprayed on him is horrible, and hears that it was needed to cover the smell of blood. The protagonist also complains that his clothes are too tight. Hans says that since this is his first meeting with the Lady of Lawrence, he should show some respect. Roman was barely used to this world, and a marriage would only increase his burden. The servant says they should be arriving, so it would be good to go downstairs to greet them. Roman understands that there was no reason to be disrespectful to a lady, but that he should break off the engagement while offending her as little as possible. But Flora was interfering with his plans and showed no respect for him, which gave our protagonist even less reason to be respectful. The young Dimitri questions the young lady, saying that she is quite arrogant, catching Lady Flora off guard. Roman says he understands that she didn't consider his circumstances when he mentioned breaking off the engagement. And he even tells the lady that when he said he would take responsibility, she started getting anxious. But from the moment they decided to break off the engagement, she could no longer interfere with his decision. Flora is embarrassed and doesn't know what to say. Our protagonist then starts to walk away, saying that from now on each will handle their own problems. His reason for taking responsibility for the breakup was to prevent future talk of marriage, and also to avoid getting involved with her again, and he leaves her alone, saying that this was the first and last time they would meet. Night falls, and we hear someone advising that someone is drinking too much, and suggests someone stop for today. It's Romulo who is drinking, and he tells his wife Lehanna that he used violence against Roman again. Looking into the wine glass, he reminds his wife that he used to beat him frequently when they were commoners, but after becoming nobles he promised never to hit him again. Gently, his wife says it was that promise that allowed their other children to grow up well. But Romulo asks about Roman, who was the only son that went through hard times with him, and he doesn't know what to do. Lehanna tells her beloved not to blame himself too much, that despite some failings as a father, they are the only ones who can correct their children. She also says that the Romulo Dimitri she knows wouldn't let his son fall into error, and that he can still make things right. The Lord asks if she's referring to the Bloodfangs, and she says that Roman is proud and must have said he would handle it in the heat of the moment, but it could be dangerous. And she suggests that her husband ask Captain Jonathan to help their son, and Romulo agrees. He calls a servant and asks him to bring Captain Jonathan to the room. It's daytime and Hans is running after Roman, saying it's dangerous to go out into the streets like that. Out of breath, he says the Bloodfangs might take this chance to get revenge, and asks if he can go back. The young master asks the servant when he thinks the Bloodfangs gained the strength they have today, but Hans doesn't really know. Then our protagonist begins to explain that they gained their bad reputation by massacring their enemies who committed crimes. That a bad reputation leads to fear, and fear brings efficiency in carrying out tasks. But Hans asks if they aren't still dangerous. With a smile, Roman says yes, but that he isn't afraid. They pass by some buildings and arrive at a restaurant. It's a pleasant place, and a waitress is serving drinks. A lot of food arrives at the table. The protagonist looks, and Hans is in awe. Roman then tells his servant that he can stay and eat, as he will leave alone, leaving the mustached man stunned. The young master states that he will continue the investigation alone from here, because it's too dangerous for his servant to come along. But Hans says he can't allow that, and that he must go even if it puts him in danger, because he cannot leave the young master alone. Roman looks at his servant, who is resolute, and he asks Hans if he is one of his men, and the servant promptly replies that yes, he is. Then the young man says that Hans must do everything he can to help and has already done so by accompanying his young master outside. Roman leaves saying he'll be back soon, leaving his servant lost behind. The mustached man never thought he'd hear such things from his master. Hans runs out of the restaurant, bumping into everyone, determined to inform someone. Meanwhile, our protagonist realizes that the Bloodfangs operate in small groups, making them hard to track, but they aren't that strong, and that they are probably acting passively because they fear not being able to kill him the right way. They are an authority without a face, and since he can't find the members of the organization, he will make them come to him. That walk with Hans was on purpose, and they probably already know where our protagonist is. And today is the regular training day for the Dimitri Knights, which reduces the number of guards on the streets. Roman walks through alleys imagining that the Bloodfangs plan to take revenge on him. And this is the perfect opportunity. Someone pulls out a knife, and our protagonist hears someone call his name. When he is attacked by a man with a knife, the Bloodfangs have arrived, and from behind, and the attack is about to happen. The captain is called. Hans comes running and shouting for Captain Jonathan. The red-haired man in armor asks the servant what happened, who, out of breath, tries to speak about his young master and that the knight has to help, until he finally manages to clearly tell Jonathan that he must find Roman, who is in danger. On the other side of the city, Roman dodges the attack, grabbing the hand with the knife and elbowing the attacker in the stomach. The enemy gets furious and narrows his eyes. Our protagonist squeezes the man's hand so tightly that the knife falls. Roman grabs it in a quick motion and strikes the Bloodfang in the neck. He pulls the knife out with no expression. The injured man backs away, trying to stop the bleeding. The other two thugs are shocked when their companion falls to the ground. They don't understand what happened because it's not what they had heard. With a slight smile, Roman asks what they're doing and tells them to hurry up and come get him. Meanwhile, Jonathan asks Hans if Master Roman went to the city without guards, and if the servant thinks he went to confront the gang, and the mustached man confirms. The captain and his men look at each other trying to understand, and they laugh, saying it doesn't make sense, since the young master is the weakest of the weak and wouldn't fight. But Hans keeps trying to convince the soldiers that it's true and says there's no reason for him to lie. He also says they can't waste time standing still. Captain Jonathan pauses for a moment to think, and remembers that the Lord said there were problems between Roman and the Bloodfangs, and he also asked him to protect the young master. He scratches his head thinking about how much of a pain this is and how reckless it is, since young Dimitri doesn't even know how to use a weapon. Jonathan orders his men to arm themselves immediately. The captain then asks Hans to take him to where Roman was and declares that as long as they're here, the Bloodfangs won't lay a finger on Roman Dimitri. And the redhead thinks that if what the servant said is true, the young master really screwed up this time. The man wounded by Roman screams as his life slips away. Young Dimitri asks again what they're waiting for, and challenges them to come and get him. One criminal clenches his teeth, and they charge with a blade. They run, yelling that they're going to take his life, while Roman waits motionless. Our protagonist dodges the attacks. He quickly glances at the strategic position he's in, and strikes the Bloodfang's abdomen. The other one screams for his second injured comrade. He charges with his dagger, but Roman notices his move, and with a kick to the abdomen, sends the man flying. He crashes to the ground, disarmed. With his enemies down, Roman asks if there were only 3 of them. The last criminal who fell says that if Roman finishes them off, he'll be screwed, but our protagonist asks how he can say that when 2 of them are already dead. The young master asks if he's just saying that to stay alive, and threatens the gangster with the knife to answer wisely what he asked. Then he stabs the knife into the criminal's leg as a warning. The man screams in pain, and Roman asks who the leader of the Bloodfangs is. Life goes on normally in the city. You can hear people talking, and inside a bar, many laugh and drink. A man is chatting when something catches his attention. He is shocked by what he sees. Roman enters the restaurant, startling everyone with his condition. The owner turns to greet the new customer and is startled. He greets the young master, who replies respectfully. Other customers murmur, wondering if it's Roman Dimitri and what he's doing there. The barkeeper asks what he'll have, and he replies, Tear of the Dawn from the 20s. The bald man says there's nothing like that in the bar and asks if he can recommend something else. Then the young master says he wants something strong, and the bar owner stares at him while he says he has something to do in the morning. Other men start to stare at our protagonist, who says that's why he needs to be a little drunk. Roman had asked the man he wounded earlier if Morning Dew was the place. The man replied that yes, it's a bar in the middle of the street, and it's where they receive their tasks. And to receive missions, you have to say a special code, which is Morning Dew, something strong, and something to do in the morning. And he was in the right place and had just said the code in the correct order. The tavern keeper calls everyone. He grabs a knife from under the counter and stands up, saying to finish off Roman, but he can't finish the sentence because he takes a hit to the face. The other Bloodfangs are shocked because our protagonist landed a punch right on the bar owner's face, and as he falls, the tavern keeper screams for them to kill the young master. The criminals are launching an attack when the other customers start fleeing and shouting for the guards. The fight grows intense, and those who escaped see a man thrown into the street, smashing through a wooden wall along the way. Our protagonist punches a guy and grabs another by the neck. Other men with Bloodfang tattoos look on and wonder what just happened, and are stunned because Roman took down 3 of them in an instant. Our protagonist knew Murum's greatest technique that increases strength through breathing, and in no time, Roman's body was already better. Then the gang yells that he's alone, so they'll take him down by sheer numbers. But the young master smiles, thinking they're nothing but a nuisance. From behind the counter, someone rises. It's the bar owner, asking what happened, and Roman replies that he arrived just in time. The protagonist says he's just about to finish and walks toward the counter. The tavern keeper asks why he's doing this, and Roman responds that he was attacked first in the bar, and that now it's just the two of them. The bar owner, nose flattened, looks at the young master, who is curious about something, and says they need to have a little talk. Then Captain Jonathan asks what's going on. The knight sees fallen men, others wounded inside the bar, and sees an unconscious one and wonders if it was something the young master did. Another guard calls the captain and shouts from the stairs that there's a survivor on the second floor who says Roman went to Lawrence. Jonathan asks why he went there, and the answer is that the Bloodfang's main base is there. An hour earlier, Roman told the bar owner that they should talk about it. The man had already lost 2 fingers, but still tells the protagonist that he won't say anything, and also screams that Roman should just kill him now, and the organization would take revenge. With a smile, the young master says he should have acted like that from the beginning, and that he kind of likes people like him. People who don't open their mouths even after torture and aren't afraid of death, because they're usually the ones with the most valuable information. The tavern keeper insists this is a waste of time, and that Roman should just kill him already. Our protagonist stares at him blankly. He walks to a picture frame on the table and says he'll try one more thing. He shows the frame where the man is with a smiling boy. Roman smiles and threatens to find the boy and kill him. The Bloodfang's expression instantly changes, and he looks worried. He looks away and says the boy in the picture isn't his son, but the young master doesn't believe him, as he sees many similarities between them. The tavern keeper clenches his teeth and roars furiously at Roman, asking how a noble like him could use someone's family as a threat. While his prisoner tries to break free from the ropes, our protagonist says he realized the Bloodfangs lived to get revenge, and that all the Bloodfangs have something in common. They were people who fell into debt with the organization despite being good people. That the organization commits crimes to make people owe them, and then turns the debtor's family into slaves. The criminals push someone to the edge of a cliff and keep their family as hostages. The man tied up with a bruised nose says that nothing changes even if he knows the truth. Roman says the Bloodfangs will have their revenge, and that the man should have thought better about where he placed his bets. And with a cruel tone, Roman throws the tavern keeper's picture of him and the boy to the floor and swears that he would kill the boy in the name of Roman Dimitri. The frame is shattered on the ground, and the protagonist says he'll make the guards search for the boy. Roman stomps on what's left of the frame and says he'll kill the boy slowly and with great pain. The tavern keeper has tears in his eyes, and the protagonist says that before that, he'll give the man one more chance. And the young master asks if the bar owner prefers to help the Bloodfangs at the cost of his son, or help the protagonist bring down the organization. In the streets of Lawrence, at a door that looks ordinary, and descending some stairs, someone is asking if it's true. A young man says that yes, an entire division lost to Roman Dimitri himself, and if his knights get involved, the organization will be in danger. An old man sitting on what seems to be a concrete throne clenches his teeth. The old man has white hair and a scar over his eye, and he refuses to believe that our protagonist did something like that. They had intended to increase their status by eliminating Dimitri, and had already lost many men to someone who was rejected by the Swordsmanship Academy. The leader of the organization asks where the young master is now and learns that he left the Dimitri region due to some possible information he obtained at Dawn's Dew. He asks if Roman is alone, and when he finds out he is, he becomes furious that he's being disrespected by attacking their headquarters solo. The old man orders his men to gather their forces immediately because they will eliminate Roman, and then get in touch with the Dimitri Knights. The gray-haired leader does not accept what our protagonist did and intends to hang his body in the square to reclaim the bad reputation of the Bloodfangs. We are now in the Lawrence lands, where the buildings are refined and elegant. A man wonders what the Barco family is up to, and it's explained to him that they've made a decision. At a long table, the council says that the Barcos took out a massive loan from the Golden Bank, and this can only mean war. The Baron, father of Lady Flora, reflects while his advisors say it's appropriate to prepare for a potential attack. He then concludes that war is inevitable, and that he never imagined this when he received the Barco's document. A bespectacled advisor says he also didn't expect the central government to side with the Barcos, and at this rate, they would lose their lands. Another older man at the table says they must protect the territory at all costs, since everything they are today is thanks to the fertile soil. The other man with glasses replies that there is a document proving the Lawrence ancestors owe their land to the Barcos, and a discussion begins about whether that's true. but the Baron stops the argument, saying to let it go, and that no matter what happens, they won't yield the land, because other families would swarm them like hyenas, and besides, the Barcos don't even seem to want an agreement, so they must resist. And that was the reason for the arranged marriage with the Dimitris. The 6 men at the table are pleased because they believe the Dimitris, though commoners, are the richest family in the northeast region. The bespectacled advisor adds that no matter the loan, the Barcos will never be richer than the Dimitris, and the Baron says that's why he gave his only daughter in marriage. Sensing his leader's guilt, a blonde advisor tells him not to blame himself because it was for Lawrence's good. The council room door is closed, and on the other side of the adorned wooden door, Lady Flora stands anxiously, thinking about what she's going to say to them. She paces back and forth, thinking she won't be able to face her father after the breakup, but that she also can't just be sold like this. She's made up her mind because she doesn't want to marry someone she has no feelings for, but behind her, a guard comes running. She wonders what the urgency is. The guard quickly salutes Flora, catching her by surprise, and keeps shouting for the Baron, saying it's an emergency, while the lady tries to understand. An angry voice shouts for them to open up immediately. A Lawrence guard tells Captain Jonathan to follow the proper procedure and drop their weapons, but the redhead yells that Roman is in danger. The Dimitri soldiers are mounted on horses, and the red-haired leader says if anything happens to the young master, they won't forgive them. A Lawrence soldier tells the captain there's a problem, and that Lawrence Square is a mess. The soldiers shout they're going to break the gate down. In the square, the citizens are shocked, wondering what's happening, and seeing badly injured feet. They wonder if they should stop him. The Bloodfang's leader is begging on the ground with a black eye and tears streaming down his face. Roman drags him through the streets while the gray-haired man pleads for mercy. A man in boots walks downstairs toward a door. The Bloodfangs are prepared for their opponent, thinking he's just another foolish noble and won't be much trouble. Several armed men watch the door, and behind all of them stands the Bloodfang's leader with arms crossed. He was pleased because he thought it would be impossible to lose, but now the gray-haired man is in shock at what he sees. All his men have been defeated. We can see terror in his eyes. Footsteps approach the gang leader, who now fears for his life. Roman is standing in front of his opponent, who is on his knees. The criminal realizes that at this pace, he won't have a chance to survive. But the Bloodfang doesn't want that, and tells himself that he will live. We then see him again, wounded and begging the young master for mercy. He is dragged through the streets of Lawrence by our protagonist. Roman then stops walking. He throws the loser to the ground in front of him. The citizens are shocked by the scene. The Bloodfang begs once more and says that if allowed to live, he would do anything for Roman and serve him for the rest of his life. The young Dimitri asks with a smile if he would become a dog, and steps on the old man's head, saying he should have said that before baring his fangs. The citizens hear that the man on the ground is the leader of the Bloodfangs, and that everyone knows how much of a scumbag he is, that this gang harmed the Dimitris and used dirty methods to deceive people. They even attacked our protagonist, who continues by saying that the Bloodfang's crimes are clear, and that he will cut the evil out at the root in front of everyone. Everyone is in shock, and Jonathan arrives on his horse shouting for his young master. But he is very startled by what he sees. He sees the ground stained red. In the Baron of Lawrence's manor, he asks if this is true, and the guard confirms, saying they allowed Roman to enter their lands, but after an hour he appeared in the plaza dragging a man. The counselors are stunned, and the guard says that after the young Dimitri stated the man was Ben Miles, the leader of the Bloodfangs, he executed the criminal in front of everyone. The Baron wonders if it makes sense that this Roman, who he had heard such bad things about, captured and executed someone in public. The counselor with glasses said that the important thing is that the young Dimitri executed someone without authorization, and that cannot be ignored. It was a problem, but it definitely didn't matter. After all, his future son-in-law had dealt with the Bloodfangs. The Lord orders that Roman be summoned immediately, because he wants to hear the story he has to tell. A man in boots and one in armor are walking, and an ornate door opens. Guided by the guard, the protagonist arrives with the captain. They enter the council room, and the Lord wasn't expecting to see Captain Jonathan, so he begins to think that Roman had help from his knights. The young master introduces himself and greets the Baron. Lord Lawrence tells him to forget the formalities and get straight to the point, asking why the young man came to Lawrence to do something so violent. Our protagonist says that a few days ago, the Bloodfangs assaulted an innocent person, and he personally executed the criminals. Outside the council room was Lady Flora once again. A guard is called, and sees that it's Flora, who had been hiding. When the young man approaches his lady, she asks if the one the guard brought is Roman Dimitri, and also asks what the young master is doing there. The guard says that it seems she hasn't heard yet, and Flora gets worried, asking what he means. Meanwhile, Roman explains that he couldn't let the Bloodfangs roam free, so he went to their main base and took care of their leader. In the room, only the Baron and the counselor with glasses remain, and they hear the whole summary of what happened. Lord Lawrence says he only wants to demand explanations from the young Dimitri, as he had no authority to execute someone in those lands. Our protagonist was aware of that, but wasn't sure the Lawrences could handle it. He says that Ben Miles was known there for his crimes and had been released several times, and Roman says that's why he didn't trust the Lawrences and took care of the Bloodfangs himself. The counselor shouts, asking how our protagonist dares to say something like that, and the young master's words make the captain question him. Roman says he's disappointed because he expected praise. After all, he was the one who got his hands dirty to solve this problem. Our protagonist even asks the Baron if, in fact, he did something wrong. Lord Lawrence questions the counselor if he knew about Ben Miles, and the man with glasses is startled and says he knew he was a criminal, but didn't know he was the leader. The Baron says that they won't discuss the case any further then, because it was indeed his responsibility to handle it. The captain and his young master salute Baron Lawrence, who says he'll reward him later and that they may leave for now. The counselor and his lord are left alone in the room. The man with glasses is shocked as the Baron begins to laugh, and he acknowledges that indeed Roman Dimitri got him. The advisor says he can't let Roman get away like that, but Lord Lawrence says he can and will, because Roman is the future husband of Flora. The Baron was about to be questioned again when he says he doesn't want to hear any more about it, as he's glad his future son-in-law is competent, and asks them to call his daughter. Back in the Dimitri lands, the horses arrive in the city. Our protagonist is accompanied by his men. The captain asks his young master if he really should have insulted the Baron, because although they got away without punishment, the Baron might get angry, and Roman replies that the Lawrences didn't take responsibility for the gang, and what he did was due to their own negligence. The young Dimitri says it seems Lord Lawrence doesn't know about the broken engagement and wouldn't punish his daughter's fiancé. This surprises the captain. He looks at the young Dimitri and reflects that he had everything planned, wondering what happened, because his young master didn't seem anything like the person he used to know. Joniak Bake was the son of the heavenly demon, but his father threw him into a pit and said that if he had the qualifications to succeed him, he would have to prove he was worthy of the cold, hard ground and survive. Bake heard that his life and the lives of his 11 siblings meant nothing to the heavenly demon, because if they all died, he could just make more. The young man feared his father, who told him to remember that he could only prove himself worthy if he reigned over everything. Bake, with his white hair and violet eyes, was on his knees, and in the pit there were other young men. Soon he is attacked. His assailant was an older boy, who says he figured the son of the heavenly demon would have something special. He adds that Bake is just an arrogant brat as Bake gets to his feet. He charges at the older boy, but gets punched in the face again. The other boys start calling him a fool. While being beaten, Bake thinks that other fathers protect their children. The punches keep coming, and the white-haired youth is grabbed by the neck, thinking he was discarded by his father into a world where only the strongest rule. Elsewhere, we see a noble house with towers. The hallways are elegant and have beautiful chandeliers, and inside the bathroom, we see a bathtub with hot water. Our protagonist is in it, relaxing. He's exhausted and notices that this body tires more easily. Since waking up in this world, Bake has already experienced many things. Our protagonist notices something. He looks at his hands and thinks that most of what he experienced has been connected to the Bloodfangs, and to win, he destroyed anything in his way. But Buck doesn't regret it, because it didn't change who he is. He tortures those who stand in his way and eliminates anyone who threatens his life, and nothing changes just because he became Roman. But it might be dangerous to keep acting this way after all. He still hasn't fully understood how this world works, and his power has decreased. Our protagonist tries to think about what he will do next and enters a dilemma. Someone calls him, and Roman snaps out of his thoughts. It's the Lord calling the young master, who replies that he'll be there soon. An ornate door stands closed, and an impatient hand is tapping its fingers on the table. It's Lord Romero, who asks if his son really did that, and the captain says yes, noticing the young master has changed a lot. The father notes that indeed Roman has changed a lot, and Jonathan confirms that the eldest Dimitri's son is no longer the same. The Lord says his son is like a wounded finger, the only one who's not impressive, and who went through his time as a commoner. Romero remembers Roman with his tiny hand giving him something. He's sweaty and asks what it is, and his son says it's a candy. The father asks if he came all the way to the mines just to deliver that, reminding him that he was ordered to stay away because it was dangerous there. But the child smiles and tells Romero that he works all day, so he wanted to bring him a sweet, and tells his father to eat the candy and finish work quickly so he can come home. The Lord explains that he always wanted his son to be happy, and that's why he favored Roman and gave him lots of money so he wouldn't be ridiculed for being poor, but never imagined that would lead his son down the wrong path. The captain hears that his master had already given up on Roman and he was about to intervene. But the Lord says that after hearing that his firstborn took care of the blood fangs, he has hope again. The young master tells his father that he is here, and the men in the room turn to look at him. Romero invites him to enter, thinking that it doesn't matter what methods his son used if he accomplished his own will. Roman enters while the father reflects that he is prepared to do anything for him, and he looks at his son, determined to correct his mistake. The Lord calls his son by name and asks if he really defeated the Bloodfangs. Our protagonist looks at the Baron in front of him and sees in Romero's expression that he has expectations for the answer, and if he learns the truth, he will see him in a different light. But Roman thinks that achievements that exceed expectations can come back to bite, and that he can retreat to buy some time to grow. Romero awaits a response, but his son is deciding whether to tell the truth or hide it, and not telling is the most rational choice. But he remembers his life as Bake, getting beaten, and his opponent above him asking if that's all he's got and telling him to strike already. The protagonist feels around himself and grabs a nearby stone. He hits his tormentor in the face with the stone, and the young attacker screams in pain. On the ground, he curses the white-haired boy, and Bake attacks again, fury in his eyes. Another scream and a crimson spurt. The protagonist's attacks continued. His hand and the stone were stained red. The other boys were terrified by what they saw, and Bake throws the stone to the ground after finishing off his enemy. He had been thrown into a world where only the strongest reigned. The protagonist asks the other boys if that was really their leader, and says then they should deliver the message that the one who defeated him will now rule this place. Roman says yes, it was him, and in his mind he remembers he is the heavenly demon and doesn't know how to hide his superiority. We then see a stone fortification, wooden swords clashing. Young men with training weapons and shields are confronting each other until a voice orders them to stop training. They stop with the approach of a man in boots. It's Romero and his son arriving, and the captain asks for respect toward their lord. Everyone salutes their baron as they pass. Our protagonist was walking past them, but catches the attention of one of the trainees, who wonders why the young master is there. They stop walking. The captain turns to those who are present and says they will now resume the fencing duel with Roman. The young men become tense, and Jonathan says that whoever wishes to participate should step forward. Everyone is very nervous and remains still. The blonde boy who had found the presence of Dimitri's eldest son Strange wonders, why now duel someone with such a bad reputation? Earlier, Roman admitted to his father that he had defeated the Bloodfangs. He was proud of himself, and Romero asked how he managed to defeat that gang. Our protagonist was thinking of an answer that wouldn't make the Lord suspicious and said that he had trained in fencing secretly. The father asks why he hid it, since he would have supported his son, and Roman replies that he had wandered for a long time, and that he wanted to prove he could do something on his own. But the Lord doesn't believe it's possible to learn fencing alone to the point of defeating a gang. Roman states that the Bloodfangs were an organization that gave illegal loans and acted through threats, so he captured the leader using false information. Romero asks worriedly if our protagonist provoked the gang leader, since the Bloodfangs always retaliated against weaker nobles. The young master says that's why he made himself the bait, and the Lord is shocked, shouting that it was dangerous because if they really wanted revenge, they would do it regardless of the leader. Roman then explains that he knew people were being blackmailed and wouldn't risk themselves for a leader. If he fell, they would be free. The room goes silent for a while as master and young master stare at each other. Romero reflects that his son planned and executed the operation carefully, and that is at the very least impressive. Surprised by his son, the father makes a request. He wants to see Roman's fencing with his own eyes to witness the change. The Lord is excited to see how much his son has changed. But now none of the young men training were willing to duel with Roman. The blonde who had already been watching the young master thought that no one would want to participate, because if they won, they'd gain nothing, and if they lost, they might get expelled. Jonathan understands that someone good is needed to maintain the knight's prestige and confirm the young master's skill. Since there are no volunteers, the captain says he'll choose. The redhead would like to face Roman, but due to his rank, he can't draw his sword for something like this. Then he calls Chris, the blonde man who had already been analyzing the situation, but is caught off guard. Jonathan calls him forward and afraid, he tries to check if he heard correctly. He's the vice captain of the Dimitri Knights. The first time Chris saw Roman was last year, when he received a report about a drunken man causing trouble at a restaurant. When they arrived at the establishment, they saw the drunk man shouting that this had to be a joke. The intoxicated man yelled that the restaurant staff were treating him like trash for no real reason. The angry man shattered a bottle on the ground and asked if the owners wanted the restaurant shut down that day. The couple who ran the establishment were worried and kept saying they were sorry and didn't mean it like that. Roman yelled at them to shut up. He was very drunk and kept saying they shouldn't even talk back to him because they were beneath him, while pouring another drink on the floor. He told one of them to come closer, but the attendant suggested he calm down. Roman threw the bottle toward them, but it hit the wall, and he shouted that if he called, it was only to be obeyed. That's when Chris intervened and told the young master that it was enough, and the young master asked who they were and told them to leave. The vice captain grabbed Roman's hand and said that if he caused any more trouble, even being the young master, he would stop him. But before he could finish speaking, the blonde man took a slap to the face. The Dimitri firstborn demanded how a mere knight dared to lay hands on him. Chris looked at him and knew at that moment that Roman had never trained in his life. Roman tried to push the soldier, who didn't even budge, and the blonde thought his strength was weaker than that of an adult man. As Roman ranted, the vice captain thought he was pathetic, even as a lord's son. Chris considered him trash who didn't even deserve to be alive. But now he was worried about having to duel Roman, as Jonathan calls him again. The blonde tries to say he shouldn't step forward for something like this, but the captain says the young master fought a gang alone, and to be fair, it has to be him. The vice captain tries to argue, but Jonathan is resolute, and against his will, Chris accepts the duel. They take their positions in the arena under everyone's gaze with their wooden swords. The blonde looks at the young master, trying to understand, but Roman's eyes are emotionless. The captain begins to announce the start of the duel, but someone asks to wait a moment. Chris says he was taught to treat every duel as a real battle, and that no matter the opponent, he doesn't intend to show mercy, and that if they accept his request, he'll take the honor of dueling the young master himself, as the vice captain doesn't believe Roman defeated the gang alone. The blonde intended to teach Roman a lesson, and the lord and the captain lock eyes, thinking about what to do. Romero looks at his son to see his reaction, and sees Roman smiling. The young master's smile unsettles Chris, and he clenches his jaw in worry as Roman accepts. The captain tells both sides to get ready. The vice captain positions his feet. Roman also plants his feet firmly on the ground. The blonde raises his sword, still slightly confused. Roman also lifts his sword with a subtle smirk. Chris widens his eyes at what he sees. The young master's gaze is calm and completely fearless. Then the captain shouts for them to begin. One of them charges forward, and it's the vice captain who goes on the offensive, while the young master stands still, expressionless. Roman watches the attack carefully and swiftly blocks the strike with his sword. Everyone is surprised by his speed and by how Chris is really going all in. Despite everything he saw, Jonathan is left speechless, and the blonde is shocked as he stares at his opponent, wondering how the young master could have blocked that attack. Roman pushes the vice captain back with strength in his sword. Chris realizes that his opponent is far stronger than he expected, and also notices that his defensive stance is very stable. But even though it wasn't what he expected, it didn't matter. The blonde would only be satisfied after beating Roman up, and he launches into a second attack. Roman dodges with skill. Chris is startled by the agility, but from his sideways position, he tries another strike, which is also blocked by our protagonist. The wooden swords are close to the young master's face, but he shows no fear. Roman forces his sword again, but the blonde moves to the side with his sword raised. Chris knows he has a chance to deliver a counterattack, and even as he tries to strike from behind his opponent, our protagonist ducks. The young master looks at the vice captain. Chris is staring, haunted by how difficult this is turning out to be. He quickly retreats backward, barely managing to dodge an attack from Roman as he rises. The strike is so fast that even though it's just wood, it cuts a bit of his opponent's blonde hair. Roman stands still as the vice captain continues to back away. Chris is retreating even more. After gaining some distance, the blonde acknowledges that was very dangerous. The lord and the captain are stunned by what they are witnessing. Another soldier watching asks if this is some kind of joke. Chris keeps staring at Roman, trying to understand, and wonders if these are really Roman's skills. The defense and dodging while attacking show that he's no fool at all, and if it's true he wiped out the Bloodfangs alone, he's in serious trouble. The vice captain wonders what he's even thinking. After all, that's the fool of the Dimitris, and he can't lose to someone like this in front of so many people. Roman says that was enough for a warm-up. Chris asks what he means, trying to grasp it. And as he runs toward the blonde, our protagonist says that this time, he'll be the one to strike first. The vice captain is frightened by what that might mean. Chris manages to block the first strike, and wonders how someone can be so fast. The blonde steps back slightly, and Roman charges in again. The wooden sword cuts through the air with great force. Our protagonist lands blow after blow, but the vice captain keeps blocking. Everyone is impressed by the flurry of chained attacks. Chris is furious at barely being able to defend himself, and thinks that at this rate it will get even more dangerous, so he starts looking for an opportunity to strike. A strike from Roman grazes the blonde, who realizes he'll have to take a step back, and that's when the vice captain notices something. The young master's movements are very open, and that gives plenty of openings to attack. Based on that, Chris goes in for a strong attack, but he looks to the side. Roman dodged, and the blonde loses his balance. Our protagonist smiles, looking downward, and the vice captain realizes he was caught, and also that he's going to lose. But that can't be. It can't end with him losing to Roman. Then glowing rays begin to surround his sword, Jonathan yells for Chris to stop, but the blonde already has the aura of a star, and his eyes glow red. Roman is caught off guard by the magic in front of him. An explosion erupts in the arena. No one can see what's happening inside. Romero shouts desperately for his son. Roman exhales after the attack, but faces his opponent, and crouched he strikes Chris, who is caught by surprise, and falls, losing his sword. The Lord and the Captain are stunned by what they've just seen. The soldiers are shocked by what happened. Roman stands with his sword raised while the Vice Captain lies face down on the ground. Our protagonist looks down victoriously at his fallen opponent. Two people clash wooden swords, and someone asks who has been named the new Vice Commander Knight. The captain is dueling a blonde man, and someone responds that he's the commander's apprentice despite looking very young. One of the two armored soldiers talking says that even though he's very young, the apprentice has a 2-star aura. The blonde man moves to attack Jonathan. During the conversation, a guard says the knight felt mana after a year and a half of training. In a restaurant, two men are talking and say that in less than 3 years the young man became a star and is also skilled with the sword. Jonathan dodges the attack. A young woman asks an older man what the apprentice's name is. The apprentice kneels, leaning on his sword, and is prostrated before the captain. Jonathan says it's time to stop. Chris is the commander's apprentice and a 2-star vice captain. The blonde gets up, saying it's fine. He's very tired but tells the commander he'd like to do this more often. Jonathan was proud of this boy because he had natural talent and dedication to match. But the one considered a genius lost the duel, fallen and disarmed. And that's why the Lord and the captain were so shocked. And that's also why the other soldiers were astonished. Roman had defeated a prodigy, and now looked down at him from above. The fortress they were in was stone and very imposing. Inside it, Chris was still on the ground. Romero asks Jonathan what happened, and if that wasn't the most decorated 2-star vice commander in Dimitri. But the knight is still trying to understand how this happened, since just a month ago the young master was only causing trouble. And these are the skills of someone who's had years of training. The red-haired man replies that his lord shouldn't be surprised by this, and that it seems the young master is a genius with sword skills. Roman is reflecting on the duel, looking at the defeat of the blonde youth. He realizes that Chris knew how to be aggressive against opponents and had sharp focus. He reflects that this would be enough to defeat the Bloodfangs alone. Roman sees that it makes sense for Jonathan to be proud of him. After all, by their standards, he's very skilled. But to our protagonist, he's the worst, and that the soldiers of the Order of Demons must be much stronger than that. Although in the end, he did surprise the young master. Romero has a huge smile on his face. The soldiers look at the Lord, laughing, including the captain, who tries to understand. Roman looks at his father, who says this is interesting. The Baron is beaming with a smile that doesn't even fit on his face, saying that his son is a genius with the sword. Romero confirms this with the captain, and Jonathan replies that he doesn't understand how Roman improved so quickly, and that he couldn't see the potential. The Lord says that now he understands, and calls his son to come to him. Then says he's never been as happy as today and praises the fact that Roman decided to take action on his own. And the father wants to give Roman a fitting reward and asks what his son desires. Our protagonist smiles. The young master reminds his father that he's going to the battlefield next semester, and the Lord asks if he doesn't want to avoid enlisting. Roman declines and says what he wants is to be able to choose his own men by himself. Romero is caught off guard as he didn't expect that request. The Lord tries to say there's still time to reconcile with Lawrence, but his son interrupts him. The young master says he wants to go on his own. The father remains stunned by such boldness. He closes his eyes, understanding his son's request, and says he will grant his son that right. Roman says he has one last request to make, and Romero says that as long as he keeps showing this dedication, there's no reason to refuse. So the young master makes a second request. Our protagonist looks at his defeated opponent. Someone shouts indignantly. Chris asks, outraged, if they want him to teach aura to the young master. The captain says those are the Lord's orders. The vice captain protests and asks if this isn't going too far. The blonde man complains about his condition, saying he even had to use aura against the boy and still lost on the counterattack. Chris says all he wants is to hide in a corner, and Jonathan still expects him to teach aura. The young man was saying he'd rather lose his head than accept, but the captain interrupts and makes his disciple an offer. The vice captain hears his commander say that if he teaches aura and finds out what's different about Roman, Jonathan will share all his secrets with him. The disciple is surprised by the proposal. He stands up and asks the captain if he's serious, and hears that yes, he is. If the blonde youth does this, the commander is willing to give him the secret to becoming a 3-star aura knight. Chris enters a dilemma, not wanting to teach the young master, but he tells Jonathan he better keep his word. Someone calls the young master and says they heard he accomplished great things in today's competition. Roman is getting dressed, and the servant continues, saying the rumors are spreading throughout the castle. Hans says he knows the vice commander is a 2-star aura knight, but that it's incredible the young master beat him. Our protagonist then asks Hans what aura is. The servant replies that he has no idea but guesses it must be the power to use mana. Roman is looking out the window and says that in this place it's called mana then. The power that Chris showed to the young master was definitely an energy burst. But even so, the way they use energy is different from what he knew in his previous life, and what they call aura is actually inefficient. The protagonist doesn't understand how they're using magic like this, and he smiles, thinking that the people of this world still need to learn more about the magic they use, and that he will analyze this energy during tomorrow's training. In a grassy field, Roman meets his new master. The vice commander is not at all excited to teach. The young master shows the same enthusiasm as Chris. The blonde youth still has a bandage on his face, and Roman lets out a mocking chuckle, which only makes his new master even angrier. Chris controls his anger and says he's going to explain what aura is. Aura is a subset of mana usage and a power used particularly by knights. Mages use mana by storing it in their magic circles. Knights store it throughout their bodies. The person known as the forerunner of aura was Emperor Alexandro. Unlike mages who stored mana in objects, he discovered that storing it in the body could strengthen a person physically. Aura is the power to erupt that stored mana outward. Although the mana is spread throughout the body, you can gain a boost in power by focusing and bursting it. But knowing the history isn't that important, and few can use mana in this way. 1 in 1,000 becomes a knight with aura, and even fewer can become mages. That's why Chris says the most important thing is to see if the young master has affinity and is capable of feeling mana, and that's where most people fail. The vice commander says it took him about 1.5 years to feel mana, and others also say it took them over a year, and that innate talent influences this time. Roman then asks how the knight did it. Chris responds that of course he can explain, and thinks about how proud Roman looks. The knight believes it will be harder for the young master than he imagines, because it has nothing to do with fencing, and he believes our protagonist is about to face a reality check. But Roman didn't need to train to feel mana, because he already knew how to do that, and thanks to the demonic heavenly mage, he was able to store mana, even if just a little. But our protagonist cannot move forward relying only on what he knows, because he must first learn how they approach things. The vice commander tells him to focus on his breathing rhythm and to concentrate on everything that is in contact with his body. The new teacher says that once you get used to mana, you're able to manifest aura, and to do that, you should focus the mana from your entire body into a single point. Our protagonist's hand begins to emit energy while Chris walks distractedly, explaining that once aura is manifested, you become a star. Roman's other hand also starts to emanate energy as the vice commander says there are many ways to use aura, like applying it to a weapon to increase its power. The body of the young Dimitri master is fully radiating mana, while the blonde says it's also possible to apply aura to one's own body. The knight was going to say that if you apply it to your body, there will be a small explosion when he notices a blast. It was Roman who had just had a power explosion. Chris couldn't believe what he was seeing. Our protagonist was manifesting the aura of a star on his first day of training. The energy was overflowing from his body. Roman's violet eyes open, but in truth, they are now red. He realizes that the people of this world use ki in a wasteful way. In Rem, ki purifies the body first so it can later be stored inside it. And when mana is collected and stored, it does not need to be expelled, because Rurum's ki is sterile and heavy, whereas in this new world, mana is more abundant and light, which makes it leak out of the body more easily. Aura resembles Murum's external arts, but those only serve to strengthen the body and don't help store mana. The fact that they externalize stored mana makes it inefficient. Using these methods, our protagonist would never reach the top, not even with hundreds of years of training. Chris pulls Roman out of his reflections and asks how the apprentice managed to do that. Roman says his master should know, and the blonde says that precisely because he knows, he can't understand how he managed it. The vice commander demands the truth from our protagonist and asks if he was pretending not to know how to use mana. Chris realizes it makes sense that he lost the duel if Roman had this power for about 2 years. The young master interrupts the knight, saying he misunderstood, but the blonde says that's the only thing that could make sense, since it took him 10 years to get a 2-star aura. Roman lets out a loud laugh and leaves Chris not understanding what's so funny. He clenches his fists, asking why Roman is laughing at his efforts. Then our protagonist asks if, while he was slaving toward this goal, he ever questioned the training methods. That leaves the young blonde stunned, and the vice commander asks his young master what he meant, and Roman says it's normal for people not to question things. Our protagonist says that while he trained, he thought about all the knights who trained along that ancient path and the proper way to approach things. Roman says he thought of the men trying to feel their ki and also wondered why people were so fixated on a method that had so many problems. Staring at the vice commander, he wonders aloud if that's because they don't know about the problems, and Chris widens his eyes upon hearing that the reason might be blind devotion to Captain Jonathan. The blonde says that's the easiest explanation, but our protagonist says he respects the 10 years of training. Yet it's funny the vice captain never questioned the method even once. Roman turns to leave, saying there's no perfect answer and every method is created based on someone's personal concerns for their successors. Our protagonist thinks that it's those concerns that cause pain in life. In another life, Bake rejected his father's method because of its flaws and forged his own path. Roman says the training ends here, but Chris calls out to his young master and makes our protagonist stop. The blonde desperately asks a favor, begging Roman to tell him what he should do now. A warrior lies on the ground, and the dirt near his hand is stained red. An adult Bake, holding a sword, looked down at the brown-haired youth prostrated at his feet. The victor asks the defeated if he's going to keep resisting, but the fallen one says he admits his loss and that the blood demon sect will follow John Hyuk. Bake turns to leave, but the man asks him to wait. His sword had been broken in half, and saying he's never seen anyone so strong, he asks what he must do to become like that. Since he's decided to dedicate himself to John Hyuk, it would be beneficial for him to grow stronger. Then the brown-haired man uses the same words as Chris, asking what he should do now. Chris waits for a response from the young master Dimitri, and our protagonist realizes that the vice captain has thrown away his pride. Roman gives a mischievous smile and says this is interesting. In Murem, Bake met the blood demon, a remarkable individual from the past who had once led the blood demon sect, a powerful order. He was someone who used to greatly influence Murem, so a clash between him and Bak Jong Hyuk was inevitable. And in the end, after a long battle, he lost. But the boy from that time chose to feel shame for his name so he could be taught. Chris, just like that demon, has the ability to cast aside his pride to become stronger, and that's why the two are so similar. That's why our protagonist found the vice captain's attitude so interesting. Roman confirms with the blonde youth that he's asking for a way to become stronger, and the young master says he can't teach something like that, so Chris asks what he can do then. Our protagonist tells the blonde that he said not to blindly follow the methods taught to him, and if he gives an answer, it would be more of the same. But Roman suggests to the vice commander that if he wants to discover it with his own hands, he can stay by his side. The young master says that in 6 months he'll go to war, and Chris can observe how he gets stronger by facing different enemies and learning the many ways to win, and continues by saying that if the blonde youth stays by his side for 10 years, he will surely find the answer. Night falls, and the stars appear in the sky. Inside a house, a simple wooden window is closed. Chris is sitting on his bed, tired and pensive. He puts a hand to his face, not knowing what to do. The blonde youth remembers everything he went through when he learned that he had to train until he could feel his mana, and that when the blonde youth managed to sense mana within half a year, he was considered a prodigy by his peers. Jonathan teaching him how to manifest his aura, his comrades admiring his achievement of reaching 1 star in just 3 years. Then the youth receiving a training sword, later hearing from the captain that he was now a 2-star aura knight. But still, Chris couldn't get Roman's words out of his head. When morning comes, the vice commander heads to the fortress where he had trained for so many years, and the captain asks in shock what his vice is saying. And Chris says he's going to follow the young master onto the battlefield. Jonathan says it seems something has happened, and the blonde youth says yes. Chris seems calm in his decision, and the captain looks into his eyes, trying to understand, and says that it's fine with him because he knows the blonde youth must have a good reason for this. Jonathan says that from now on, Chris is no longer part of the Dimitri Knights, and that he hopes he can protect the young master while pursuing his goal. The green-eyed blonde youth thanks him. Jonathan notices that Chris is no longer the same. During a battle, Jonathan once saw a little blonde boy on top of his fallen mother, who was already lifeless. That child used to cry for his mother, but not anymore. The captain stands up saying that because of this, he's certain that if Chris is willing to follow Roman, then the young master can no longer be called a fool. Jonathan walks toward a door, saying that Chris will need to prepare from now on, but the young man doesn't understand. Then the captain says that if he wants to survive on the battlefield, he'll need a secret weapon. The blonde young man lights up and agrees with his master. Meanwhile, in the city, people go about their lives. Someone carries a crate at the market and overhears rumors. At a table, 2 men talk about the young master having dealt with the blood fangs, and the other doesn't think it makes sense since he's a noble with no talent. A red-haired youth hears this conversation, where one of the men says the rumors seemed very real, and the other claims it must have been the knights who did it. Kevin was the one carrying a crate and is shocked that the young master dealt with the blood fangs. After all, it was Roman who took care of some thugs using only a branch, and that shows he might have taken down the gang by himself. Kevin's eyes well up with emotion, thinking that the young master kept his word, but he wipes his face, thinking there's no way Roman did something like that for someone like him. But still, he solved the loan shark problem. Another man asks what Kevin is doing, since he won't go home until the cleaning is finished, and the young man agrees. The sun is already setting and the sky is showing the twilight. Someone walks by wearing short boots, and the red-haired youth thinks that he wants to become someone like the young master, strong enough to protect those around him, because there are still people like the Bloodfangs in the world, and he needs to protect his family. Kevin keeps working, wondering how he'll ever get stronger if he's not lucky enough to meet Rome again when someone calls his name. He looks up, surprised, since he wasn't paying attention to his surroundings. Kevin is stunned by what he sees. The emotion is so overwhelming, he drops the crate of potatoes. It's the young master, who says it's been a while. The red-haired boy asks why he's there, but before he can get a reply, he tries to say something else. He throws himself at Roman's feet and thanks him energetically, because thanks to him, Kevin's family was able to survive. Our protagonist says he shouldn't worry about that and asks if he's doing well. The young man says that once the threats stopped, Hans found him a job. The red-haired boy says he doesn't know how to express his gratitude, but the young master replies that once he makes his offer, he'll know. Kevin doesn't understand, and Roman explains that if he accepts, he'll never have to worry about his family's financial problems again and will have a good home and good food. The young man, still on the ground, listens as the offer includes being able to enjoy some luxuries during his free time, and our protagonist says he'll make sure it all happens. What the young master asks is that he live for him and give him his loyalty. Then he'll have a life he won't regret. The red-haired boy is shocked by the offer he just heard. His lips press together, showing he's made a decision, and he prostrates himself even harder, pledging his life to the young master. This causes his head to hit the ground, leaving a wound, but Kevin says that whatever the master commands, he will do, no matter if it means taking someone's life or even his own. He raises his wounded face to look at the young master and says that as long as he promises to protect his family, his life belongs to Roman. Our protagonist observes that Kevin shows his loyalty with his own blood, and that reminds him of the Mad Horse. With a single command, the Mad Horse charges through hundreds of enemies and wouldn't retreat until it was finished. The similarity between the red-haired youth and a Maroon warrior was like that of Chris and the Blood Demon. And knowing it would be worth it, our protagonist agrees to the deal, and from now on, the red-haired boy belongs to him. After recruiting the boy, the protagonist decided to leave him under Hans's care, who would help him adapt. Kevin found it admirable when he saw the young master say he'd make sure to visit him later. Before leaving, the protagonist mentioned he'd be in the library, and if they needed him, they could find him there. As he walked away, Hans was already talking to Kevin about what life would be like from now on. Already in the library, several books had been carefully stacked on the table for reading. The protagonist was studying about Aura Knights, wishing to understand the path necessary to become one. He was focused on a manual that taught how to manifest the purposes of an Aura Knight. He observed that there were specific marks that would qualify someone as a 2-star Aura Knight, capable even of cutting steel. In the books, he read that upon reaching the level of a 3-star knight, one would be beyond the ordinary and stronger than many captains. Consulting the map, he saw that on the continent of Salamander, there were knights who had reached up to 6 stars. Not even among the top 10 ranked individuals was it common to find someone who had reached that level. Studying further, he understood that Jonathan, ranked as a 3-star, was comparable to a second-class fighter. He understood that reaching the level of 6 stars meant surpassing the limits of human capability. He believed these people could unleash attacks with their blades that reached dozens of meters. Currently, only 12 people had achieved the level of 6-star knights, being treated like actual royalty. They were known as the 12 Blades of the Continent, and even with limited information, the protagonist knew they seemed extremely powerful. He did not disregard the fact that even with inefficient use of support kits, they managed to reach such a level, proving their talent. He also learned of the existence of mages and archmages, individuals who reached the 7th circle and were granted a special title. In pure numbers, 7th-circle archmages were more powerful than 6-star Aura Knights. He discovered that this type of magic was non-existent in Murim, which intrigued him even more. After long hours of study, he now had a clear idea of what he needed to do, without expecting to be confronted by such beings. He knew the inability to predict what would happen made everything extremely dangerous and unpredictable. He acknowledged that he was never made to live in a stable place alongside others. He thought it would be exciting to gain enough experience to live a fulfilling and satisfying life. He thought the first step would be to begin proper preparation, then headed to a new location. With him was his right hand, who opened a residence previously used to show it to the young master. Curious, the protagonist wanted to know what that space had been used for in the past. Hans explained that it was a workshop used by the former Baron, who had prohibited outsiders from entering. Seeming satisfied, the young master stated that the place would be ideal for his training. He said he would spend the next week there, without needing food or supplies, and did not wish to be disturbed. No one should interrupt him unless there was a serious threat to his people. Used to the young master's unusual requests, Hans simply nodded and assured him it would be done. After the warning, the protagonist returned to the workshop to begin his intensive training. Upon entering, he noticed something strange on the floor that hadn't been there before. He saw straw scattered around, assuming Hans had placed it there for added comfort. Although he appreciated the gesture, he knew that could negatively affect the flow of ki. He decided to organize the space properly, moving the straw to the corner of the room. He sat on the floor in a meditative position and began circulating his mana. He took a deep breath, as he intended to use the technique of the Heavenly Demon Mage, focusing on the first stage. That initial phase was called Human, requiring absolute concentration and mastery over one's inner flow. He knew he needed to purge all the impurities from his body, even if it caused intense pain. That process caused weakness and adverse reactions, but it was essential to continue on the path of ascension. He noticed that the mana did not flow freely, constantly interrupted by internal impurities. Aware of his own condition, he had already anticipated this obstacle and had gathered a small amount of mana. Determined to live this new life, he knew he had to recover his original strength to protect everyone. Entering the human stage was only the beginning, painful, but still just a necessary start. After a week, hurried footsteps echoed through the hallway as people searched for the young master. Upon entering a room, they were asked to wait a moment while the butler prepared some refreshments. The Viscount and Lady Flora, who were looking for the young master, were the ones who waited. During the wait, Viscount Lawrence wanted to know where Ronan was at that moment. He was informed that the young master was currently handling some important personal matters. From the cold reception, it was clear that this Viscount was not welcome at the residence. Even he noticed that, although the visit had been out of whim, there was no warm reception. Speaking with his daughter, he suggested they wait and asked her to sit calmly. The Viscount seemed to want to talk about something serious with his daughter, who remained composed. He said he had come to apologize for the previous mistake, asking her to be prudent. But unexpectedly, the daughter revealed that she had decided to share her true feelings during the last visit. Upon hearing that she had expressed her intention to end the arranged marriage, he fell into despair. He blamed himself, feeling that he should have been more direct instead of relying solely on his own judgment. The sound of rain against the castle window reinforced the sense that she was unaware of the territory's situation. He said that now, all that remained for the family was to prepare for an imminent war. The arranged marriage with the Dmitri family was necessary, as only they had the power to defend the family. The daughter's shocked expression made it clear that she was unaware of the current fragility of House Lawrence. The father stated that if it were just the Barco family, they could fight, but the government was also involved. That meant it was no longer just a dispute between families, but a conflict on a national scale. He now believed that those who had lent power to the Barco family would also be responsible for the downfall of the Lawrence. The Viscount told his daughter that those enemies would do anything to take everything they had. She heard her father say that even she, known as the Flower of Lawrence, would be taken. The young woman felt guilty and clenched her fists in frustration. She imagined that, had she understood the territory's situation, she would never have made such a hasty decision. Closing her eyes, she thought that if she continued to obsess over the pride of being the flower, they would lose everything. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Hans was pacing back and forth, not knowing what to do. He knew that the Viscount and Lady Flora had been waiting for the young master since early with great expectation. But he had also received clear orders not to interrupt him under any circumstances. While he struggled with the doubt, the workshop door slowly opened. As soon as he saw the young master, Hans was both surprised and relieved. His eyes widened, for he could not believe the appearance of the one who now stood before him. It was clear through the window that afternoon had arrived, with golden tones warming the silent room. The Viscount and his daughter had already had several cups of tea amidst exhausting conversations. Though now they sat in total silence, having spoken too much, the fatigue on their faces was evident. The Viscount reflected seriously and believed he was now determined to act to protect his family. Looking at the daughter beside him, he believed this was a direct consequence of her mistake. To ensure the survival of his family and preserve the territory, he needed to guarantee that the marriage took place. But even imagining the possibility of something going wrong made his hands start to tremble. Overcome by a sudden wave of anger, he realized that this situation was unacceptable and decided to act. Flora watched her father rise and, with a sudden premonition, knew he was about to do something impulsive. She was startled when she heard him declare that he would personally go meet Baron Dmitri immediately. Meanwhile, the Baron was in his personal office, handling the many bureaucratic matters that had piled up in the territory. Someone knocked hard at the door, and after several insistent knocks, the entrance was abruptly opened. The Viscount entered with firm steps and demanded to know why they had been left waiting for so long. He said that if the Baron was displeased with their visit, he could at least say so and tell them not to return. As he poured out his complaints and questions loudly, the Baron observed him in complete silence. Until, moving his quill in the inkwell, he responded that he understood the frustration and the unexpected situation. He said that if they had scheduled a formal appointment, they would have been received with proper consideration. The Viscount spread his arms in dissatisfaction and stated that the urgency had prevented them from giving prior notice. Baron Dmitri, still calm, asked if unexpected visits couldn't reasonably be refused. He wanted to know if that was really the only reason for invading his office so rudely. He thought the Viscount was simply irritated about being forced to wait half the day. That statement made the Viscount recall the day his son visited Flora with intentions of marriage. At the time, he was surprised and thought of reprimanding him, but even a child could have understood the situation. The Baron, clenching his fists on the desk, said he never questioned Ronan's reasons for acting. The Viscount heard the Baron state that both of them were victims of an arranged and unwanted marriage. Flora lowered her head upon hearing that the arrangement had initially come from her own family. Unable to contain his irritation, the Baron continued, saying that nothing justified such impulsive and disrespectful behavior. Even hurt by the unexpected visit, they would not ignore the mistakes made throughout the process. He pointed out the Viscount's mistake in barging into the room just to complain, without reflecting on his own actions. In the face of the Baron's authority, the two guests could do nothing but listen in silence. The Baron questioned what would have happened if he had chosen the Barco family as his main ally. After that comment, and having barely moved all day, he collapsed into his worn-out seat. As drops of ink stained the floor, the Viscount grasped the gravity of that delicate situation. He asked why the Baron had refused such a beneficial offer, at least from his own perspective. Still displeased, the Baron replied that the Dmitri family already held power and did not desire forced alliances. He said the real reason was tied to the eldest son, who had genuine affection for Flora. The Viscount, upon understanding all that, admitted that he had acted hastily and recklessly. He had to hear the Baron say that Flora and Ronan were not truly an ideal match. However, he emphasized that whenever the name Dmitri joined another, its value was elevated. Looking out the window, he said they were not the ones desperate for marriage, it was the Lawrences. Still watching Flora, he asked if he was really wrong to say that given the current situation. It was then that Flora recalled her childhood, the days spent at the academy with other noble families. She remembered a time when the children of nobility practiced social and communal activities. There was a family so small that its legitimacy was often questioned by the other nobles. That was Joel, the son of that house, a child who was always downcast and isolated from the other students. While all the children believed they were destined for glory, Joel was treated as the exception. One day, Joel accidentally broke a vase of flowers and caused a major problem. Unlike the other noble children, who were ignored when they made mistakes, Joel underwent a formal disciplinary process. Flora saw the teacher scolding the boy, along with a man who seemed to be his father. The man begged for forgiveness for the child and promised to educate him properly with total dedication. At that moment, Flora thought it was an extremely sad scene to witness. Now in the present, downcast, she felt it was all a great irony of fate. Her father was in the same position as that man, apologizing for his mistakes in front of someone else. She looked at the Baron and realized it was he who truly understood the situation. She remembered how weak Joel was and now saw that her own family was in the same condition. She knew she had to act with wisdom, as the weak always bowed before the truly strong. And so she bowed before the Baron as a gesture of silent and respectful surrender. Soon after, footsteps echoed, and everyone turned upon hearing someone announce Ronan's arrival. The door began to open slowly, and all attention turned to the figure entering. The blonde girl with blue eyes simply watched the man approaching with serenity. She watched his steps and thought that now she understood everything she had taken so long to realize. From Ronan's posture, she understood that he was not like the rumors circulating through the streets. And now, not only she, but even the Viscount watched him with surprise and admiration. The Baron, trying to hide his astonishment, asked his son if he had already finished his training. He said they would talk later about what had happened, preserving peace in front of the family involved in the engagement. While listening to his father, Ronan looked around the room and saw the spilled inkwell on the floor. He understood that the decision was now entirely in his own hands and no one else's. Then he turned to the young lady and said he understood the meaning of that union between the two families. He knew the Barco family threatened the Lawrences, and the Dmitris were a key piece in that equation. Surprising even his own father, who asked if he still desired the marriage, he remained calm. Ronan replied that in the past he did not understand the weight of the decision he was about to make. But now, after learning the truth, he confessed that he had completely changed the way he thought. He said that surely the Lawrences had heard rumors about how naive the Dmitri firstborn was, and he concluded that regardless of external judgments, that no longer mattered to him. He continued saying that was why he no longer wanted any changes to occur in his life. And when he said that, both the Viscount and his daughter realized the mistake they had made. The protagonist glanced sideways at the two and said that the marriage should be dissolved immediately. His words shocked everyone present in that tense, silent office filled with accumulated pressure between families. The Viscount understood that it was over. This was the final move his family had attempted. He thought they would have to resolve that problem using only what the Lawrence family still had. And thinking that way, he had an idea, for if Dmitri's and Barco's worked together, nothing could be done. Bowing once more, though this time with clenched fists, he said it was all the Lawrence family's fault alone. Still bowing, he stated that they would not charge temporary taxes on Dmitri merchants passing through their lands. The Baron wisely declined, saying it wasn't necessary, and that he didn't want future problems or unbalanced agreements. Still looking at the young man, he said they should announce that Flora ended the relationship for personal reasons. With that, the man simply bowed in gratitude, showing the weight of his actions and consequences on his face. Both the Viscount and his daughter bowed before the Baron and the heir of the Dmitri family. After that, they opened the door and left slowly, but the Viscount held onto the door in silence. He looked back, his gaze filled with sorrow as if he had lost a key piece in that battle. He could only watch and leave behind a future that, for a long time, had seemed certain. He looked specifically at the protagonist and couldn't believe that Ronan was so different from the rumors. Now he regretted it. He should have observed and noticed the young man's true value from the beginning. Still slowly passing through the door, he thought he too had made a mistake much greater than he had imagined. After they left, the door closed, and the two remained in complete silence for a while, until the Baron drew the protagonist's attention and looked directly into his eyes with seriousness. The father wanted to know what had happened to his son during the past week. The son explained that during training, he remained secluded inside a warehouse with no outside contact. He believed he had trained his body and removed all impurities necessary to enter the human stage. While in the human stage, the steps were painful, but he managed to mold his body to progress. The amount of impurities in Ronan's body was critical, which led to many complications. It was difficult even to prepare the body's foundation, but in the end, it had a significant effect. He thought the changes in his physical appearance were proof that he had become someone different. He told his father only that he had managed to open his mind while training alone with discipline. This startled the father, but he didn't press for details and only said that mana was circulating well. Now the Baron thought it was something rare, but he was, in a way, proud of his son. This son, who had once been considered a knave problem, was now completing tasks that impressed any observer. He knew his son had grown beyond human comprehension, but he was still his beloved eldest son. With that, the father looked at his son and said he would always be there to help him with everything. He wanted his son to never forget that he was Ronan Dmitri, heir of the noble family. Looking directly at the protagonist, he said he would always support him, even from afar. That made the protagonist recall memories of his past life in the wild Murem world. In that life, there were no people who blindly supported someone during the grueling process of learning. Not even he had patience for those who were not exceptional in talent or deep determination. Pressing his eyes shut, he thought that here, the father was neither cold nor rigid as he had expected. Furthermore, Baron Romero Dmitri supported him without asking for anything in return, which was rare. Hearing those words, he fell silent for a moment, then thanked him with a respectful gesture. He had the look of someone with new ideas and thought that having the support of Baron was useful. As he left the office and walked down the corridor, he heard a voice call out to him. He saw that it was Flora, the blonde young woman with green eyes, now with a calmer appearance. She apologized once more, saying she truly regretted having judged him so hastily. The protagonist simply turned his back, saying he didn't need to hear repeated apologies for old decisions. As she walked behind him, she asked him not to be angry with her because of the marriage. She knew she had broken the promise without consulting him first, and so she apologized while she still had the chance. As she spoke, the protagonist looked at her for a moment and listened with restrained seriousness. She said she would explain the reason for the cancellation of the engagement, that it wasn't so simple. She spoke of a formal social gathering where all the royal families of the Northeast came together. Everything began at that event, when rumors started spreading about her engagement to a knave Dmitri. However, the rumors didn't stop there. They kept spreading, each time with worse content. She said the rumors claimed he was a drug-addicted, unstable user. She apologized for not having met him personally, but she knew that drugs destroyed a person's sanity. While she still had his attention, she took the opportunity to say she hadn't known the rumors were false. However, the protagonist turned again and said that, whatever the past was, nothing would change now. He repeated that this was why she didn't need to worry anymore as he walked away from her. The blonde girl could only watch him grow distant, walking slowly and disappearing from her saddened view. Night quickly fell, and the moon could already be seen through the window of the illuminated castle. Meanwhile, Hans served tea to the protagonist, who was sitting comfortably, watching the steam rise. He noticed that the young master seemed deep in thought. Indeed, the protagonist was reflecting on what he had heard. He looked at the tea that had been served and thought that although it had medicinal traces, it lacked specific substances. He hadn't found signs of narcotics in the body during training, which is why he needed to ask a direct question. He startled the mustached man with the unusual question, but said he needed a clear answer. Hans, sweating and very worried, just listened as the master said he didn't want to rely on confused memories. Holding the tray, the man said that although he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he had noticed something. The protagonist heard about strange behavior and wanted to know exactly when it began. The mustached man said it was about a month ago, after an important social event. At first, the occasion didn't raise any red flags, but after that day, everything gradually began to change. He said the young master started acting oddly and deteriorating more and more with each passing day. Over time, he remained constantly in his room and avoided interaction with anyone. He developed a habit of requesting excessive amounts of alcohol every night, something completely unusual. Hans said he had thought the young master was using narcotics, but now he had changed his mind. The protagonist recalled the young lady's words about social gatherings between influential families, so he asked the man if he knew who had hosted the previously mentioned party. He was told it was Anthony, the eldest son of the Barco family, who was involved in political power. Now the protagonist began piecing everything together in his mind, and the chain of events became clearer. Ronan had an arranged marriage, was invited to a party, and something had happened on that mysterious night. After that, he decided he no longer wanted to live in that society and took a dangerous drug. Now the protagonist believed he finally understood what was really happening in his own story. From the start, something had bothered the protagonist. It was the contents of the letter left by Ronan. The letter said he would be the only sibling sent to war, which deeply frightened him. That news shook him so much that he lost all will to live or move forward. He constantly thought about the fact that Ronan had already promised to marry young Flora. He knew there were many ways to prevent married royals from being sent to war, so the idea of giving up on life simply out of fear of war didn't seem to make sense. He asked Hans whether there had ever been a close connection between Ronan and Anthony Barco during their youth. The man answered sincerely that no one ever showed real interest in spending time with the young master. Hans also knew that the arranged marriage was a major obstacle to the Barco family's plan. The easiest way to resolve that obstacle would be to prevent the marriage from happening in the first place. The protagonist believed the Barco family had used every trick possible to drive his brother Ronan insane. In a recent conversation, Hans mentioned that they had received an invitation from the Barco family a few days ago. That detail caught his attention as he didn't understand the reason behind receiving such an invitation from them. Hans explained that this had occurred precisely during the time when the protagonist had gone to train in secret. With that, he considered the Barco family extremely superficial and realized they continued to blatantly underestimate him. Feeling irritated at being ignored, he asked Hans about the scheduled date for that party. While sipping his tea, he heard Hans say that the event would take place in 2 weeks. With firm authority, he ordered that his presence at the Barco family's party be confirmed immediately. During one of the lessons in the Great Mansion, Hans guided the young Kevin through the halls toward the main room. Before opening the door, Hans warned him not to be startled by the master's presence. Upon entering, Kevin asked his master if he had been summoned for a private conversation. The protagonist observed him calmly and confirmed with a look that he had been expecting him for some time. Kevin, with a surprised expression, finally understood the reason behind Hans' earlier concern. Attentively, the master asked his disciple how things had been since their last meeting. Kevin replied that he was doing fine, but showed a certain discomfort that he couldn't hide in his posture. He said he had been thinking about his role within the castle, not understanding how he could be useful. He admitted that so far, he hadn't done anything noteworthy or even ordinary to stand out from the others. The protagonist then decided to make it clear what Kevin's role would be in his own story. He stated that he intended to use him as his personal sword, which left Kevin completely stunned by the proposal. It was strange to think that someone as irrelevant as him could be considered a valuable sword. However, the master emphasized that a person's worth was not determined by the will of others. He said this opened up a few possible paths, and the first one was to give up on becoming a sword. He could simply follow Hans and obey as a helper, never taking on greater responsibilities within the hierarchy. Or he could become the master's sword, personally protecting him as a trusted escort member. Kevin explained that he had never even touched a sword in his entire life until that moment, but the protagonist continued, saying that if he wanted, he could train him using methods that would cause excruciating pain. He referred to techniques involving muscle destruction and bone pressure, provoking continuous and unbearable pain. Staring at Kevin, he stated that these were not empty words, but a real and final decision. As he spoke, He drew a sword on the ground and explained that there was still a third possible option. He threw a sword in Kevin's direction, who only looked at it silently when the blade hit the ground. The third option was to cut off his own arm, enduring the pain intentionally inflicted by himself. If he were able to remain standing after the act, he would prove himself worthy of being considered strong. The protagonist remembered a mad demon, raised in the streets, who didn't even know how to fight at first. That being would become one of the 4 heavenly kings solely through his unshakable will and hunger for power. That's why he looked at Kevin and stated that his destiny would depend solely on his own will. Far from Dmitri Castle, Kevin recalled his childhood in an old house slowly falling apart. As a child, he grew used to working to survive, helping his parents with any kind of task possible. Thanks to that, he learned early on how to do all the manual and domestic labor assigned to him. Even with constant effort, there was always someone to disrupt his life and block any small personal progress. He remembered the persecution from loan sharks and mercenaries who constantly threatened his family. And he also remembered how he was saved by that master, a man as strong as he was mysterious. Picking up the sword from the ground, he thought that cutting off his own arm might not be that hard. Even without fully understanding the meaning, he imagined it would make him stronger and more resolute. He only wished to escape the miserable life he had lived, so he was willing to do whatever was asked. While watching whether Kevin would wield the sword, the protagonist simply observed the silent unfolding of the scene. His gaze refocused when Kevin gripped the sword properly and extended his own arm. He noticed the firmness in the young man's hands, determined to follow the order despite the imminent pain. He saw how he held the hilt and the glint on the face of someone who longed for power. Kevin's face displayed madness and a desire to prove something he himself didn't fully understand. That expression caught the protagonist's attention, who was now able to see his true intentions. In the hallway, firm footsteps echoed. It was Knight Chris, who had decided to permanently leave the order. Upon finding Hans, Chris sought more information about the current situation of young Master Dmitri. In front of the closed door, Hans explained that he was currently in a meeting with Kevin. Chris heard the name but had no idea who Hans was referring to when mentioning that boy. He asked who the person was, while inside the room something unexpected was happening. The sword was already stained with blood, and Kevin's arm flew through the air, separated from his body. Despite the pain, Kevin kept the same determination as before and didn't hesitate in his decision. Shortly after completing the act, he dropped the sword and knelt, still being watched closely. Unable to withstand the pressure upon him, Kevin fainted under the protagonist's impassive gaze. In that moment, he managed to prove his worth to someone as powerful as Dmitri's own protagonist. Sometime later, Hans entered the room and was startled to see the sword covered in blood. He feared the young master had been injured, but a man nearby reassured him with a light smile. He said the blood on the sword wasn't the protagonist's, and there was no need to worry. He revealed that, in the decisive moment, the protagonist had placed Kevin under a powerful temporary illusion. It was the charm of the demon of illusion, a test to see how far Kevin could endure emotionally. Kevin had withstood the trial and came out with only a small cut on his right arm. Now at last he had the master's approval and a new position among the closest chosen ones. There were still 2 weeks left until the celebration, and Chris was positioned exactly where the protagonist wanted. There were 6 months left until the war, and Kevin had proven that he could become someone loyal. The protagonist knew there was still much to teach before they reached the desired level of efficiency. Inside the training room, the protagonist decided he would personally teach the mana enhancement technique. Kevin was startled to hear he would have the chance to learn something so powerful and rare. Baek Jong-hyuk knew the technique wasn't common. It was the same one used by the so-called Mad Demon, an ancestral martial technique that had been stored in the treasury of the main house, called the Divine Soul Spiritual Technique. It allowed the user to exert power under extreme pain, even when all their limbs were greatly injured. Now that Baek recognized Kevin's true value, he could teach him more calmly. He also told the young man that there was a reason for passing down such a dangerous and powerful technique. Upon hearing this, Kevin was satisfied, for he knew that if he mastered that technique, he could protect everyone. Even with deep gratitude, he still didn't know how to express what he felt for being given such an opportunity. He wanted to know why his master trusted him so much, even though he was just a recent and limited apprentice. Although he had sworn to give his life for him, he didn't know how to show such immense gratitude convincingly. Once again, Baek heard the same question that other disciples had asked before about true trust. The protagonist tried to explain but couldn't find the right words to justify the trust he placed in him. Even though Kevin wished to hear an explanation, he had to settle for the master's silence. The only thing he heard was the warning that training would begin the next day. Meanwhile, the protagonist reflected on the reason why he trusted Kevin so deeply as a deserving disciple. He remembered that the Mad Demon had once asked the same question long ago, with the same distressed expression. He knew that unconditional trust came from pure belief that someone would never betray him. He believed Kevin would never betray him because, as he matured, he would understand the danger of betraying a heavenly demon. The next morning, training began with dedication and discipline, as previously agreed. Kevin was learning the basics of the technique, where the key to action lay in the start of every movement. He was encouraged not to lose focus as the protagonist continued instructing with attention and rigor. Meanwhile, Knight Chris watched from a distance, seated, clearly uncomfortable with his current stagnant position. He constantly questioned why he had left the Knights, thinking he would learn more by following Ronin. However, all he saw was the young master teaching a strange boy without involving him in anything relevant. He thought he would find quick ways to become stronger just by staying close to the protagonist. Now he was treated as someone invisible and thought it would be better to return to the Knight Order. Despite that, he decided to keep observing and be patient for a few more days of silent waiting. The following days didn't change much, and Chris remained seated on a crate, simply watching the training. Over time, he began to feel bored, and at one point, he even fell asleep during the lesson. Tired of the situation, he threw his gloves to the ground, determined to speak directly to the master. He stood up and approached the protagonist, full of questions about his absence from practical training. He said it had already been 2 weeks since he decided to faithfully follow the young master. While voicing his frustration, Kevin just watched silently as the knight kept complaining non-stop. Chris explained that in the first week he had waited to be trained, and in the second he saw Kevin being taught. Wake simply observed silently until he decided to speak and said he had already given prior notice. He had said Chris would learn just by observing, but realized the knight hadn't understood the literal meaning. Without wasting time, he turned his back and walked away, for he couldn't teach everyone at once. Kevin was still a beginner and would only learn directly from the master after reaching a certain level. On the other hand, Chris would learn at his own pace and would have to work hard to earn instruction. As the protagonist grabbed a wooden sword, he heard Chris complain that he still wanted to keep observing. In response, he tossed the wooden sword to him, and Chris caught it with a surprised and confused look. With the sword in his hands, he asked what the master expected him to do with it. That's when he heard he would be facing Kevin in combat, and surprise took over both of them. The protagonist explained that Kevin would be the opponent, but he would give advice on how to beat him. He stated that if even after the duel Chris still held the same thoughts, then he would train him. To Kevin, the idea seemed absurd, as he had never imagined fighting against such an experienced knight. To Chris, it was infuriating to have to duel someone who had only started training a few days ago. He ground his teeth in frustration at having to fight a beginner who barely knew how to hold a sword. Even so, he accepted the challenge, for he desperately wanted to be trained by the young master. With everything settled, the two stood face to face, ready for the start of the duel. Kevin looked anxiously at the young master and asked if he really had to face such a strong knight. Bake replied that there were countless people stronger in the world and he couldn't run from all of them. He also asked if Kevin planned to just stand still every time someone threatened the people he loved. Those words awakened something in Kevin, who responded with determination that he would give his all in the fight. Meanwhile, Chris was furious. He found it humiliating to have to fight an unprepared rookie. He looked at Ronin with anger and thought he wouldn't let himself be humiliated by just one fight. If the young master wanted to fight, then he would fight with everything, even against a mere novice. As soon as Ronin announced the start of the duel, Chris charged at Kevin with all his speed. He thought it was impossible to lose to someone who had trained for only 1 week. With the first block, Kevin sensed the intent behind the fast movements of the experienced opponent. Their swords clashed, and the difference in skill between them was already visible in the impact. Chris's counterattack was far too quick, and Kevin couldn't do anything to avoid the blow. He took a direct kick to the abdomen and fell to the ground with an expression of intense pain. With nothing he could do, the young man hit the ground like a sack of potatoes. Seeing that pitiful scene, Chris thought the boy was extremely weak. After that, he looked at Roman, believing he had suggested the duel for some reason, yet he just stood still. Looking at the red-haired youth, he didn't know exactly what he was thinking. Gripping the hilt of his sword tightly, he decided to finish it as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, Ronin simply watched attentively, analyzing how his students were behaving in that duel. The duel went on, and the redhead kept receiving blows one after another. However, he remained standing purely through resilience and his will to prove his worth to the master. After falling once again, he held onto his sword, unwilling to give up just yet. Chris looked at the boy and admitted he had held on longer than expected for a common person. While Kevin tried to get up, supporting himself on his sword, Chris spoke to him, saying it would be better to give up. The two-star knight continued saying that, if he wanted, he could have split his skull in two. Even though Kevin was already noticing the signs and consequences of fighting an experienced knight, he showed no intention of giving up. Chris, watching him, noticed he was still determined to keep fighting. He warned that if he insisted on continuing, he would certainly lose a limb, or at the very least be seriously harmed. Hearing Chris's words, Kevin just smiled with a crazed expression. That smile on the redhead's face, who had been getting beaten from the start, unnerved the experienced knight, but it made his master slightly proud. Putting himself back into a combat stance, Kevin proved to be more stubborn than Chris had imagined, and he was determined to fight until the end. After the incident, they were again told to prepare to continue. One of the two seemed satisfied, but the order for Kevin was to guard his front with his sword. The master's voice echoed in his mind, warning that Chris would strike by surprise. Once again, they were to raise their swords and proceed with the fight. Chris charged once more with full force toward Kevin, who managed to block the attack just barely. At that moment, the master's voice was in his head, telling him to step to the side. The red-haired boy, still very clumsy, tried to follow the instruction but ended up losing his balance. Naturally, as an experienced knight, Chris would not let the opening go to waste and took the opportunity without hesitation. Once again, he delivered a strong kick to the boy's abdomen, and just like before, Kevin was sent crashing to the ground. While still lying on his back, he heard the master's voice in his mind, ordering him to get up immediately. He recognized that voice as his master's, who explained that it was a sound transmission technique. It was a method of transmitting sound using mana, allowing Bake to give instructions even from a distance. Kevin looked at the master in surprise, not knowing humans could do such a thing. But again, the voice ordered him to throw himself to the right without hesitation. By obeying, the young man managed to dodge the strike the blonde knight would have delivered. Chris looked on with suspicion, realizing that Kevin had managed to evade the blow. The master's voice continued guiding him, indicating the next moves to execute. Thus, Kevin was able to attempt a counterattack for the first time against the knight. However, Chris retaliated quickly and landed another kick, taking advantage of the redhead's constantly exposed guard. The surprising part was that this time, Kevin didn't fall, he only stumbled. Even feeling sharp pain in his abdomen from being hit several times, he remained standing. Then he heard the voice order him to block the next strike, which would come from above. He noticed that the instructions were always accurate. His physical slowness was the main obstacle. He received a new order, this time to dodge to the right, but was still struck with a knee to the face. Once again, he was thrown to the ground on his back. This time, there was a small nosebleed. Meanwhile, Chris, the experienced knight, was sweating and thinking the boy was holding out longer than expected. The protagonist observed everything carefully, knowing that Kevin was no match for Chris, as his body couldn't keep up with the commands. Even so, there was something amusing about the situation, and Kevin was starting to enjoy being guided by the young master. He knew that Master Ronin was all-powerful, and if he followed every command, he could even defeat powerful opponents. Even if his opponent was a 2-star or a knight, he realized that Chris' movements followed exactly as Ronin predicted. Even Kevin understood the problem was his slow body, since the commands themselves were correct. Now the situation resembled a puppet being guided by Bake, with Chris as the target to be manipulated. Once more, the command came, instructing him to spin his body to the right. It was time to move forward and counterattack with courage. Chris quickly picked up on Kevin's intention and managed to dodge the strike. Without wasting time, he countered with a punch straight to the redhead's face. He noticed that Kevin was trying to bring him down, and yet he barely avoided fatal movements. Even the counterattack seemed premeditated, and Chris began to doubt this was all coincidence. Kevin knew that not even Chris, considered a genius, could stand up to Master Ronin. With more determination, he gripped the sword with both hands and decided that he would become the master's sword. Now he showed his willpower, ready to strike without fear of retaliation. As expected, the counterattack came, leaving visible wounds. Chris cast a sadistic look at Kevin and warned him that if he insisted on fighting, things would end badly. He promised to deform whatever body part he used to fight back. The red-haired boy just smiled, showing disinterest in his opponent's threats. That reaction sparked interest from his master and surprise from his opponent. Smiling, Kevin said he could keep fighting until the end and held tightly to his sword. That gesture enraged the 2-star aura knight. Chris would not accept that someone insignificant stood between him and the ideal training he longed for. Walking toward Kevin, he declared that if that was his wish, he would make it happen. He raised his sword recklessly and charged full force at the rookie. He warned that every time Kevin looked at his deformed arm, he would remember him. Even so, Kevin stared firmly into his opponent's eyes. He still heard Ronin's commands in his mind, telling him to move. The instruction was simple: take a step forward, always forward, without hesitation. Kevin would attack with everything, unafraid of being hit again. He nearly landed the strike, but the experienced knight managed to dodge. Thus, Kevin failed to complete the instructed move. Chris couldn't understand how the rookie knew he would step forward. Bake, for his part, warned that the fight was not over and that the disciple needed to keep going. Following the orders, Kevin spun his body quickly, keeping his sword firm in hand. Chris watched the rookie, who held the sword with determination and had a resolute gaze. Kevin obeyed the orders to attack the enemy fiercely. Still, Chris doubted he could be struck by such an obvious and slow move, but as he countered, he relived a recent scene still vivid in his memory. Meanwhile, the protagonist analyzed the reactions of each of his disciples. By guiding Kevin, he managed to make Chris falter when attempting another counterattack. Now Chris looked at Kevin and saw someone completely different from the beginning of the fight. The rookie dared to attack boldly, all under the watchful eye of the master. But Chris was experienced, and his body reacted almost instinctively. He placed himself in the exact position to evade the strike and gain the upper hand. With a firm gaze, he declared the fight was nearing its end. With a strong blow, he struck Kevin's sword, knocking it far away along with its wielder. He then declared himself the sole victor. At least that's what he believed at that moment. Meanwhile, the young master watched with arms crossed. He noticed that Chris had swung the sword, expecting the second strike to be a feint. Since Kevin was too slow, he couldn't react in time to dodge it. Chris looked at what had happened and considered the rookie to be an extremely annoying guy. As he walked past Chris, the protagonist said he had won, and as promised, would personally train him. While helping Kevin get up, he told Chris that training would begin the next day. Back in his room, throwing his vest onto the bed, Chris wondered why he had fought at all. He thought it had been a fight with no real gains and that he had merely wasted his time. However, something came to mind. Kevin's final maneuver. It seemed strangely familiar. It was the same situation he had experienced when facing Ronin, a scene he had revisited in his mind for years. He realized that without that prior experience, he might have been defeated by Kevin without the redhead even using aura. This discovery brought him a sense of satisfaction, for he had been feeling bored for days, and so he understood that he had grown just from that experience alone. When the new day dawned, he was still thinking about what he would do. In front of the young master, he decided to confess what he had concluded. He didn't need any specific training, he would simply follow his master to grow stronger. He knew he had matured from that single duel. Every decision Kevin made had been the correct one given the situation. Now seated, he reflected on the fight and realized it had been filled with lessons. He looked at the young master before him and noticed that he was no longer the same as before. He was determined to observe him until the day he could face him on equal footing. With his experience, Bake understood exactly what was happening, and that left him pleased. With that feeling, he announced that they would continue with the training. And so, a week passed, and the day of the celebration organized by the Barcos finally arrived. A week before the social event, certain rumors had already begun circulating among the people, drawing much attention, especially rumors about the divorce, which pointed to Roman's incompetence as the main reason for the separation. To the nobles, the fact that Roman had divorced Flora confirmed the most negative rumors about him, even more so considering that the Lawrences needed the support of the Dmitri family, and breaking off the marriage caused political damage. Some even claimed that the story of Roman defeating Bloodfang was just a convenient fabrication. The supposed goal was merely to restore the Dmitri reputation amidst the spreading family scandal. At the Barco family residence, someone was laughing scandalously at the latest news circulating throughout the kingdom. This person did not believe that Roman had truly divorced and thought he would be easy to manipulate. He asked the butler if the protagonist had confirmed his attendance at the event and received an affirmative response. That man was Anthony Barco, the eldest son of the Barco family and the main force behind the recent developments. Now that everything was going as planned, he was eagerly awaiting the arrival of the gathering. Meanwhile, at the Dmitri household, the protagonist was thoughtfully observing the flamboyant outfit left by Hans. Hans explained that since it was his first public appearance after the divorce, something flashy was essential. While saying this with conviction, the protagonist was visibly irritated by Hans' exaggerated taste. Hans had already anticipated resistance and stated that he knew Roman wouldn't easily agree to wear it. Even so, he had put effort into creating a piece he considered a true work of art. The protagonist forced a smile, unable to completely hide his dissatisfaction with such a bold choice. Despite his reluctance, he agreed to wear the outfit, aware that he needed to make a strong impression. Outside, Chris was waiting impatiently beside the carriage, expecting Kevin to arrive. When the redhead came running, he apologized, explaining he still wasn't used to the armor. Chris complained that the armor was far too big, but Kevin said there were no sizes available for him. For a moment, Chris wondered how he had almost lost to someone so small and clumsy. He felt uneasy seeing Kevin struggle even with his own helmet. Then Chris ordered him to pay attention as he had something important to say. He said that as Roman's escorts, their behavior would directly reflect on the reputation of the Dmitri family. Kevin listened carefully and responded respectfully, addressing Chris as Sir Knight and promising to obey. The formality pleased Chris, but he quickly followed with another scolding, telling Kevin to fix his helmet. The scene shifted to the Barco family mansion, where the social event was already underway. Several nobles were gathered in the grand hall, enjoying the evening and their refined drinks. As with any gathering of aristocrats, gossip soon began to circulate among the guests. One noble asked whether Roman would actually attend, doubting he would show up after the political scandal. Another said that breaking off the marriage while the Barco family was aiming at the Lawrences was irresponsible. A noblewoman commented that such impulsive behavior was exactly what made Roman look foolish. Even if the Dmitri family was powerful in the northeast, it was greedy to try to maintain ties with the Barcos. A third noble said that at the very least, Roman should show up to try and make up for his own mistake. Curious, a woman asked what kind of man Roman was, trying to better understand his reputation. One guest said Roman left a terrible impression. Another claimed Flora was right to leave him. At that moment, a butler drew the guest's attention with a solemn and well-articulated announcement. He was announcing the arrival of Roman Dmitri, and all eyes turned toward the entrance. The door opened slowly, and the protagonist entered with a confident smile, surprising the guests. No one imagined he would appear so imposing, with white hair and a proud posture. People could barely whisper, stunned by the visible change in his appearance and demeanor. The curious woman stepped away from the group, approaching Roman with growing interest and admiration. She introduced herself as Sophia, from the Grizzle family, and said it was an honor to meet him in person that evening. She explained that her father, Baron Grizzle, dedicated his life to serving the kingdom. Roman said he knew the Grizzle family, which caused surprise and sincere joy in Sophia. He said it was impossible not to know a family with centuries of history devoted to the kingdom. In the past, Roman had studied the origins and deeds of the influential families of the north. Hans, curious, asked why the protagonist had been reading so many noble records. Roman explained that, as a representative of the Dmitri family, he ought to have the courtesy of knowing the others. He knew his reputation was terrible, so he needed to compensate with effort and knowledge. In the present, Roman displayed confidence while conversing with Sophia and praising her brother's accomplishments. The conversation went on for a while, drawing curious and impressed glances from the other nobles. Soon, several other guests approached to greet Roman and strike up conversation. He showed himself to be sociable and flattering, maintaining courtesy even with those who had previously looked down on him. He listened to their comments, responded politely, and knew how to reference the achievements and titles of the families present. One of the nobles commented that he used to find Roman difficult to deal with, as he always seemed drunk. While chatting with the nobles, Roman was interrupted by a butler from the Barco family. The elderly man announced that young Master Barco was inviting Roman to the back room. The protagonist thought he was finally going to meet the one who had been troubling him with silent maneuvers. Outside, Kevin observed the other families, noticing they were surrounded by well-equipped escorts. He asked Chris what a social party was, but the blonde replied that it didn't matter. He said they would never participate in such things, so there was no reason to worry about the details. Some noble knights began making sarcastic remarks while Chris scolded Kevin. They mocked the two, saying they were a joke and shouldn't be there as escorts. They claimed that Roman had brought along a brat who couldn't even hold a sword properly. They went further, saying that was the true level of the famous Dmitri family. With that, Kevin lost his patience, feeling humiliated by the other knights' provocations. The old Roman was at an elegant social party, watching the interactions between the ladies. He paid special attention to Flora, as it was the first time he had seen her there. Anthony approached Roman, curious about his interest in the girl at that night's event. Roman asked Anthony who the girl was, surprising his friend for not knowing her yet. Anthony explained that she was Flora, the heiress of the influential Lawrence family in that region. In the present, Roman entered the room, where Anthony awaited him with a serious expression. Anthony asked what had happened to the protagonist during the time they were apart. The protagonist analyzed the man in front of him, recognizing the one behind the past problems. Anthony said he knew the protagonist had changed, but hadn't expected it to be this much. Looking around, Roman noticed that other people were present in the same room. The fact that Anthony had removed them clearly indicated that something secret was about to be revealed. Thinking about that, Roman decided he needed to make Anthony comfortable enough to tell the truth. He said he used to flaunt money to stand out but had recently changed for no apparent reason. He also declared it was truly good to see Anthony again after such a long time apart. Anthony, confident and smug, felt in control of the conversation and the entire situation. He said he liked to see things in a positive light and admitted he hadn't understood the protagonist before. Roman asked what Anthony meant by before, already suspicious of what was about to be revealed. Anthony spoke of the political marriage with the Lawrence family and the unexpected betrayal. Even though many secrets were well kept at the party, the involvement with another woman was shocking. He claimed Roman's presence confirmed that he had accepted the proposal. Anthony assured him he would keep everything confidential and that they could begin negotiating the marriage. The protagonist was stunned, as that was the last thing he expected to hear in such a complicated situation. Memories started to surface in Roman's mind, bringing back old scenes and emotions. The old Roman was standing before that very room's door, confused and anxious. He believed he had betrayed Anthony by asking his father for the political marriage with the Lawrence family. He knew he couldn't run away from or avoid that alliance forever. He had to accept it. The intention was to restore the family's relationship with the Barco, something very important. Anthony said the protagonist had been late for the meeting they had arranged at that party. Then he introduced his cousin to Roman, suggesting that she join them. He asked if she could drink with them, as she was alone at her first party. The old Roman agreed without issue, and Anthony told her to serve the drinks as well. Roman refused, but Anthony got irritated, accusing him of showing off because of the marriage. Roman tried to apologize, but Anthony quickly said it was no problem at all. Happy, Roman asked if he was really serious, still unaware of the trap. Anthony confirmed and told him he could drink guilt-free and enjoy the entire party. Knave, Roman accepted the wine, not realizing the drink had been spiked to harm him. After just a few sips, Roman passed out, losing consciousness and control over himself. When he woke up, he didn't know where he was or how he had ended up in that awkward situation. He was lying there without clothes, next to Anthony's cousin, trying to regain his senses. He wondered how it had all happened, but was interrupted by an unexpected entrance. Anthony entered the room, pretending to be surprised and angry, trying to hide his scheme. Roman was stunned, unable to recall how he ended up in bed with the cousin. Later, they talked about what happened, and Anthony revealed his reason for interfering. He said he didn't care about Roman's relationships, but the lady was from the Barco family. He couldn't let it slide and had to act to protect the family's honor. He gave Roman a clear choice between public exposure or marrying into the Barco family. He said that though full of hatred, he could forgive him if he became part of the family. He asked what Roman would choose in such a complicated and threatening situation. We return to the present, where Roman finally understood the reason why everything had happened that way. Now it made sense why he had been trapped in that crossroads with no clear escape. If he broke off the marriage with the Barco, the honor of the Dmitri family would be completely ruined. Roman wouldn't have the courage to face his furious father, nor could he choose any other option. He loved Flora and knew that undoing the marriage would shame her before society. The original Roman, too weak to fix anything, chose to end himself rather than face the decision. He was a miserable, pathetic man, easily manipulated by those around him. Anthony asked why Roman was hesitating, reminding him that united, the families would dominate the region. He said they would have absolute power over the Northeast. There was no reason to reject the deal. Roman cut him off, leaving Anthony stunned by the firmness of that unexpected answer. The protagonist refused the political marriage for a reason Anthony considered insignificant. Anthony insisted there was no other choice, as exposing the secret would destroy his reputation. Before he could finish, Roman slammed his feet on the table, showing determination and anger. Anthony was startled and shocked by such a bold and unexpected act. Roman repeated that he saw no valid reason to accept that forced marriage. Meanwhile, the party continued outside, with guests and nobles enjoying themselves as usual. Sophia was happy to see the protagonist again after so long apart. She asked him where he had gone during such a busy night at the party. Roman simply replied that he had important matters to deal with and would be leaving soon. The nobles speaking with Roman didn't want him to leave the party so soon. He politely excused himself and left the hall, heading toward the exit. As he passed through the corridor, he already heard shouting and recognized a familiar voice in the commotion. Looking toward the source of the commotion, his eyes widened in surprise. He saw Kevin's helmet fly across the floor, thrown by one of the escort knights. After being mocked by the escort knights, Chris and Kevin tried to keep their composure. The other pair exchanged looks, pleased to have provoked them and wanting to push further. They resumed mocking, this time cruelly teasing Kevin's short stature. They even said he looked like he put on some random armor just to pretend to be a guard. Chris asked if the Barco knights trained in jokes instead of learning to wield swords. The other man, Smug, said that even without training he'd have more skill than Kevin. He added that this was why soldiers called Roman an idiot. Kevin ordered the knight to take back the insult, repeating the command now with a shout. Thinking he was in charge, the man struck Kevin on the head with disproportionate force. Chris shouted for Kevin, now serious and preparing to draw his sword quickly. As he pulled out his sword, he considered the tense situation and its likely consequences. The Barco and Mitri families were already in conflict, and this fight could make it worse. If he got involved in that clash, it would immediately bring trouble to the entire Mitri family. Kevin got up and said he was a knight of Roman, uninterested in criminal soldiers. He called the Barco soldiers low-level troops pretending to be real knights. The man was irritated by the words and said he wanted to see how long his pride would last. Before he could act, he was easily restrained, surprised by the swift reaction. Kevin was even more surprised, but Chris was more shocked than anyone else there. Kevin looked at Roman, who was effortlessly holding the arm of the aggressive man. The protagonist cast a firm gaze at the knight, full of silent authority. Before the man could react, he was struck with a strong blow to the face. Everyone went silent, feeling the intense tension that filled the air. The knight couldn't understand how he was hit so quickly. With no time to defend himself, as he went to curse, he took another hit to the face, visibly losing his balance. He couldn't even regain his stance before taking another slap to learn his lesson. Bent over, he let out a grunt while staggering backward, nearly falling. The final strike came from above, forcing the man to kneel instantly. He lifted his eyes to Roman, a mix of bewilderment and outrage in his expression. Cold and indifferent, the protagonist ordered him to raise his head immediately. The scene shifted to Anthony, defeated and deep in thought in his silent room. He genuinely wanted to understand what had recently happened to the protagonist. In their conversation, Anthony said that refusing the marriage with the Barco family was a grave mistake. Roman replied that Anthony could do and say whatever he wanted, without concern. He already had a bad reputation, but he knew he had enough power to be above the Barco. For that reason, he told Anthony to reconsider his conduct and act more carefully. Roman explained that he divorced by his own choice, even knowing the Barco had benefited from it. But now that Anthony had shown his claws, he had a reason to support the Lawrence family, even if it was just to ease his personal resentment against Anthony himself. The protagonist believed the Barco's power came solely from their ties with the government. But in military might and wealth, the Dmitri were the strongest in the entire region. Now cold and commanding, Roman asked what Anthony intended to do about the situation. Anthony asked if, should they settle things here, Roman would remain neutral, which he confirmed. Though unconvinced, Anthony said the matter ended there, no further discussion needed. Afterwards, he realized Roman had completely changed, not just physically. His way of looking, acting, and speaking had become something entirely different from the past. A butler called for the young master, insisting despite Anthony's protests. He then explained what was happening between Roman and one of the Barco knights at that moment. The scene shifted outside, where many nobles and servants watched the situation unfold. There were sighs and expressions of astonishment at the chaos that had erupted. The Barco knight, tired of being beaten, begged for mercy unconditionally. Kevin and Chris insisted the punishment had already been enough for that man. They said it wasn't worth provoking more conflict with the Barco family at that point. Authoritatively, Roman said he was the one who decided what was enough punishment. Anthony shouted from afar, outraged by the scene unfolding before his eyes. He said not even Dmitri had the right to act that way and demanded an apology. Indifferent, Roman said he saw no reason to apologize to anyone. He explained that the Barco knight messed with one of his own and deserved the punishment. He asked Anthony directly who he thought was in the wrong in that situation. Anthony tried to say that Roman had gone too far in punishing the knight, but Roman reminded him that if the Dmitri turned against the Barco family would be destroyed. He warned that if the Barco didn't want to feel his wrath, Anthony should control his actions. He told him to decide quickly, as he was not a man with much patience. Anthony remembered what Roman had said about supporting the Lawrence family and changed his mind. Irritated and frustrated, he raged internally at the situation growing too complicated. He then admitted that the protagonist was right in his decision and punishment of the soldier. Almost mockingly, Roman remarked that they really did understand each other on that point. He turned his attention back to the soldier, ordering him to grit his teeth as it wasn't over. The soldier was taken elsewhere to continue the punishment determined by Roman. The new Roman was different from the man who had always been disrespected and humiliated. Even being from the Dmitri family, the most powerful house in the northeastern region, he had changed. The protagonist called Chris and Kevin to return with him calmly. That commanding and authoritarian posture was something the old Roman never had. Everyone present, nobles and knights, immediately recognized that undeniable fact. The fool they had once known and despised no longer existed, as if he were someone else. It was already late, with the sun setting on the horizon. Kevin and Chris remained silent in the carriage, each lost in their own thoughts. Kevin finally broke the silence, apologizing for being the reason the protagonist was insulted and disrespected. Chris also apologized for not stepping in when Kevin was attacked and the family name was dishonored. Roman listened to their apologies in silence, saying nothing. After a moment, he broke the silence by thanking them for holding out until he arrived. He said they had done well not to act rashly, as that stance had avoided the worst possible outcome. Even so, Roman made it clear that this was not the response he expected from them. He emphasized that in the northeast of Cairo, no one should dare mess with the Dmitri. He stressed that they should always remember the faces of those who humiliated them and keep that grudge burning. Roman stated that he couldn't tolerate anything or anyone above him, and that his followers should get used to being at his side at the top. For that, they would have to adapt to his ways and conduct. Those words echoed in Kevin and Chris' minds for the rest of the journey. Back at home, Roman received from Hans the information he had requested from the guild about the Barco family. According to the guild, the Barco's recent movements were highly unusual. The protagonist analyzed the documents while listening attentively. The Barco family had settled in the northeast just over a century ago. At the time it rose as the dominant house in the region, one of its members joined the central government. Roman commented that it was just as he had analyzed, very little military power. Even Hans was surprised to find out how weak the Barcos were despite their high status. Roman explained that this only proved the power of the central government. The continent of Salamandra is composed of 2 empires and 6 kingdoms, including the kingdom of Cairo, the smallest and weakest. This is because its borders face all the other kingdoms except for the northeastern mountain range. Being surrounded, they had to ally with the central government to ensure survival. Thus, the central government gained power, and its authority over conscription became absolute. Any noble family that refused conscription was considered rebellious and immediately eliminated. After eliminating the rebels and confiscating their lands, the neighboring lords who helped were given a portion. The rest was granted to someone loyal to the government. This system of influence empowered the Barco family through their connections with the central government, which was their only real strength. It was also how the Barcos obtained such large loans from the gold bank. Ronan presumed that the Barcos had taken out loans with credit guarantees but no collateral to fund a mercenary company. This company consisted of hundreds of mercenaries, with rank a burge at its core, and earned extra fees by fighting in territorial battles. Considering they had been recruiting locals recently, they were expected to attack the Lawrence family in about half a month, Hans reported. Hans spoke in a trembling voice, saying that in a war, the Lawrence wouldn't stand a chance. Ronan recalled telling Anthony Barco that he wouldn't interfere in his affairs with the Lawrence. However, to guarantee Anthony's survival, he couldn't let the Barcos live after making such threats. Even with support, the Barcos wouldn't stand a chance against the Dmitri. It would be an easy task to use the power of the family, but that wouldn't make any sense. Aside from their common origin, the other northeastern nobles did not view Roman as a threat. What the protagonist truly needed was an opportunity to ascend to a higher level, like last time. Roman told Hans that he needed to see his father immediately. It was time to collect what was owed to him since the last occasion. The scene shifted to another location. People were looking on, surprised and discreetly, at a mercenary in blood-stained armor walking by. He removed his helmet, and while looking around, remarked that the Dmitri hadn't changed at all. It was Lucas, a rank B mercenary. He was looking for an equipment shop and entered one. The shopkeeper, examining the gear on the counter, commented that it was quite worn out. He asked if the battle had been tough, to which Lucas replied that he had nearly been killed. The experienced blacksmith said that just by looking, he could tell the equipment was of mediocre quality. He asked where the mercenary had bought it. Lucas said it was just from some random store. The blacksmith said he had made a mistake, as he should have bought from the Dmitri, who provided the best equipment. Lucas said he had come there precisely because he knew that and was now under their care. The blacksmith explained he would make a full set, but that it would take some time. Unbothered by the wait, Lucas said he was recovering there in Dmitri territory for now. He also said he was tired of the battlefield. As he walked, he saw a group of people gathered. Curious, he wondered what they were all watching. He thought maybe it was a war announcement. Though he wasn't interested in any jobs for now, he wanted to see what it was. He read a poster, which turned out to be a recruitment announcement. The prerequisites were being healthy and having the desire to become strong. 30 soldiers would be recruited in total, with a salary of 8 silver coins per month. The minimum income for a family of 4 was around 5 silver coins or less, making the offer attractive despite the risks. The only downside was that the soldiers would belong specifically to Roman, and not to the Dmitri family, something the recruits needed to keep in mind. A man advised Lucas not to enlist, since hundreds had already applied. Lucas told the old man that he was a rank B mercenary, and charged at least 50 silver coins to give his loyalty to a noble. Suddenly, Lucas wondered if he had heard the old man correctly. He asked if hundreds of people had really applied, and the man confirmed, to Lucas' astonishment. Lucas stated that even with good conditions, he wouldn't work for the idiot from the Dmitri family. He said only God knows what kind of trial a soldier would have to face there. The environment fell silent, with a heavy atmosphere, as if a major blunder had just been spoken. The old man told Lucas that outsiders might not know, but Roman was no longer an idiot. He had not only destroyed the Bloodfang gang, but now treated people with respect. The man himself admitted that those who saw it happen doubted it at first. After Clark's son became Roman's subordinate, his family's life improved significantly. The old man tried to remember the boy's name. He wasn't sure, but he thought it was Kevin. Meanwhile, at the Dmitri estate, Kevin wondered if he should really take a leave. The protagonist confirmed, saying it would be 3 days and that the break was an extension of training. He encouraged Kevin to always work with dedication and to enjoy the time with his family. Kevin thanked his lord and went straight to his room to get ready. While changing clothes, he thought about the leave. To him, the break felt strange, as before all this, he wouldn't have survived without working every single day. He had been at the castle for a long time and hadn't seen his family since. As he left his room, Hans stopped him. He told Kevin he couldn't visit his family wearing old clothes, handed him new ones, and asked him to change. He also gave him his salary, which was now 30 silver coins per month. Hans suggested that Kevin enjoy himself during the break. Now Kevin was on his way home to see his family. He felt great in his new clothes. He bought plenty of fresh bread and hoped his family would like it. He was sure his sister would love it, as she had always wanted fresh bread with whipped cream. He remembered the time she complained about having to eat old, hard bread. Even so, he had never been able to buy any for her, since fresh bread cost more than the stale kind. He also thought about the Bloodfang, who had robbed them and destroyed what little they had. Now things were different, and he was determined. No matter what happened, he would grow stronger under his young master's guidance. His family would never go through that again. He arrived in front of the house, surprised and a little confused. Things were different there too. The new house was large and his parents looked happy. Very different from the poor, ragged people they used to be. Kevin was pleasantly surprised by the changes. Now he understood why they told him to go through the outskirts of the castle and not through the slums. Then they noticed his arrival, carrying a bag of fresh bread. His mother hugged him joyfully at seeing him again, causing the bread to fall to the ground. Kevin asked how everything had changed so much, and his father said that Hans had visited them, given them the house to live in and land to cultivate, saying it was the master's will. His mother said the people from the castle gave them all kinds of help to get settled. Kevin thought about it and knew Roman had no obligation to do any of that. He cried, even more grateful to his lord. After looking closely at Kevin's face, his father noticed something odd. He saw bruises and asked if Roman had hit him. Kevin tried to explain, awkwardly, that it wasn't like that. His mother said Kevin could tell the truth and that if he were being mistreated, they would try to do something about it. Kevin quickly stated that Roman wasn't that kind of person. He told his parents what had happened with a knight from the Barco family. When his father told others about it, no one believed him. He said that, according to Kevin, Roman had beaten up a Barco knight to protect him. The man told someone else, who also didn't believe it. The woman passed on the rumor, saying that the Clark family now lived well thanks to Kevin's work for Roman. A worker who overheard the conversation passed the rumor to another woman. The rumor kept circulating. Some thought it might be a mistake, since they remembered Roman's former bad conduct. Even children heard it, and one of them said he wanted to become a soldier for Roman, just like Kevin. Now people wanted to earn Roman's trust, just like the Clark family, who were now living very well. Among the citizens, this was the new perception of the protagonist. Working for him was a chance at a new life. This became firmly fixed in the minds of the people. Roman Mitri treats his people with respect. If you gain his trust, it's possible to live a better life. That's what the old man was explaining to Lucas. This was the reason so many people were signing up for the recruitment. To the mercenary, this information was a tangled knot in his mind. He had met Roman Mitri, the man who used to cause trouble in a casino over a loss. He asked the man what had happened in the last 2 years for Roman to have changed so much. For Lucas, it was intriguing, and he decided to enroll in the recruitment to see it with his own eyes. At the Mitri castle, someone was reporting to the protagonist's father that preparations for the exam were going well. They would provide the minimum number of soldiers to regulate the entrance, and Roman would handle the overall process. The father asked if that was everything. The knight had more to say and began by stating that this was the last chance to turn things around. He asked if the lord agreed with that training private soldiers for a single individual was dangerous, and that the lord should at least ask Roman what his true goal was. Before he could add more, he was interrupted. The protagonist's father said that, upon learning Roman would attend the social event, he had hoped Roman would cooperate with the Barco to remove the second son from the line of succession. But Roman, in front of the nobles, struck a Barco knight and convinced Anthony to admit Roman was right, even knowing that Anthony could join forces with the brother to strip Roman of his succession rights out of revenge. Roman had been considered an idiot for over a decade, but began living his own way after the Bloodfang incident. He told the knight that he would not scold Roman, but rather congratulate him. The knight said he understood. He asked how many had registered, and considering Roman's reputation, any number above 50 would be a relief. Contrary to expectations, the knight replied that over 500 people had signed up, leaving the protagonist's father speechless. The next day outside, people were gathering at a training field. Lucas was among them. Everyone was waiting for the recruitment exam to begin. Chris approached the protagonist to inform him. He said all preparations were complete. Ronan was sitting on a barrel listening, but said nothing, maintaining an air of mystery. Then came the day before the test. The mercenary Lucas was drinking at a bar. He commented that the Dmitri beer was still as good as ever. However, he drifted off into thought. He thought he hadn't expected so many people to apply for the test. He noticed 3 men sitting together at the corner table. Judging by the copper badges hanging from their belts, he assumed they were rank C mercenaries. He looked at another 3 at the bar counter, who also seemed to be experienced battle mercenaries. He reflected that there were countless inns in the Dmitri territory, yet only 5 or 6 decent people in that space. The level of the candidates was much higher than he expected. He wondered why, since they had enough experience for better jobs, and not all were there just out of curiosity like him. He didn't understand what was happening, which made him even more curious. When he stood up to leave, he overheard a conversation. A man asked his friend if he wasn't going to become a Lawrence soldier. The man replied that he was, since that was his hometown. But after seeing Roman destroy the Blood Fang in Lawrence, he changed his mind. The people who weren't there didn't believe it, but that day he saw Roman in the square, covered in blood and dragging the Blood Fang leader by the hair. The young master of a noble family who had traveled to another territory to punish the Blood Fang for harming his people, crushing their leader. He couldn't forget the scene, which remained vivid in his memory. Sometimes he still got chills. Even if people denied and doubted the incident in Lawrence, he knew what he had seen and felt firsthand, and said that Roman Mitri was not the weakling the rumors claimed. Roman is a true leader who fights for his people, and that soldier recruitment was a golden opportunity to become one of his subordinates. Lucas's curiosity grew, and he stayed to listen to the whole conversation, better understanding the reason why so many people were applying. All that commotion really wasn't a coincidence. Back to the test day at the Dmitri training yard. Most candidates were relaxed, different from Lucas, who was thinking about what choice to make. Many were there driven by curiosity and wanted to confirm the rumors for themselves. He knew the moment to choose would come when he saw Roman in person. Being a curious type, he grew uneasy with the sudden silence. Only after a few seconds did he realize what was happening. Roman had just arrived, commanding respect. He walked slowly among the candidates, alongside his 2 soldiers. Even without any command, everyone unconsciously bowed their heads and stepped aside. Lucas observed and confirmed that the rumors were true. Roman ascended the stairs, slow and composed. He said nothing and made no grand gestures, yet everyone felt the pressure of his presence. Just by walking, his imposing posture and cold gaze left the candidates trembling. He ordered everyone to raise their heads. He began by saying that, as described in the announcement, he would select 30 soldiers for himself that day. But first, they needed to hear something important. Roman Dmitri declared that he had no intention of spending his life confined to a remote territory. He would always be fighting to reach the top, and his soldiers would have to risk their lives in that process. Those without the determination for that should leave now. He said they should never resent him for dragging them onto the battlefield, but rather regret not having witnessed him standing above all, as the most powerful on the continent. The candidates took a moment to understand those words. Lucas couldn't believe what he had just heard from someone whose position within his own family was still at risk. He thought it was extremely arrogant of Roman to claim he would rise to the top of the continent. Even if the statement seemed like arrogance, Roman made it feel as though he could achieve it at any moment. Chris stepped forward and said he would explain the test instructions. He explained that it would be simple. They would go to the designated spot, and an archer would fire 3 arrows at them. The arrow might fly wide and hit the board behind them, or it might strike them directly and cause a fatal wound. Only those who didn't move while the arrows were being fired would pass the first test. Anyone who moved would be immediately disqualified. The test would proceed in the order the names were called. Then, the first candidate stepped into position and the archer was ready to shoot. One of the observers questioned whether the test would really be like this, since it made no sense to kill a private soldier during an evaluation. He was certain the archer was extremely skilled, and that he would never miss. The archer took a breath, aimed, and fired. The arrow flew past the side of the candidate's neck. Just watching made it clear this was a psychological battle. The most important thing to pass was to relax and believe nothing would happen. While the candidate thought the arrow would miss, he saw it fly and strike near his leg. The next in line was stunned. The observers in the back were shocked. The man who was hit was in a state of shock. He fell to the ground with his leg badly injured. Chris ordered them to bring a medic and something to carry the injured man. They brought a stretcher and removed him from the area. The group's confidence disappeared. They weren't prepared for this. Calmly, Chris called the next one. He told him to hurry up. The next man thought about how the arrow hit the other's leg, and if it had been the head, it would have been the end. The man said this was insane and that he only signed up to try and become a knight. Chris then assumed the second in line had given up. He raised his voice and declared that anyone afraid of becoming meat on a skewer should give up now. But those who endured, even after being hit by an arrow, would proudly earn the qualification of having passed the first test. He shouted that if there were any cowards there, they should leave immediately. One day before the test, the protagonist had summoned his 2 assistants and a few trusted knights. He informed them that the archer was a professional and would only hit non-fatal areas. Then he revealed that the reward for accepting being a target would be given in gold. With that, Chris opened a large chest, and everyone was amazed to see the gold they could divide among themselves. But continued, saying they wouldn't be seriously injured and that a medic would be on standby. As soon as they saw that amount of gold, they agreed to join the young master's plan. However, Chris had a doubt and thought his master might be going too far. But the protagonist explained that he couldn't find the people he was looking for with simple threats. Even if the chance of being hit by an arrow was only 1%, many would be scared and eliminated. Still, Chris wanted to know what the requirement was to become his subordinate. Bake said he wanted someone with a strong mentality, someone with the heart of a beast. But the term heart of a beast sounded strange to Chris, though his master explained that only with such a heart could they go beyond, and people with that kind of caliber could walk beside him, while many of those who lacked that strength would drop out of the test. Chris noticed that approximately 100 people had quit, leaving only 400. He informed the young master that many had left, but he didn't mind because he knew the heart of a beast was an innate talent. It was something like Kevin, who cut off his own arm without hesitation just because his master asked him to. Or even Chris, who sought help from the very one who had humiliated him. Those kinds of people were born with the heart of a beast. As for the others, those who weren't born that way, their efforts to win would be in vain. On the day of the test, the protagonist needed to find that kind of person among all the candidates, and so the test began. In the area reserved for the test inside the castle, someone could be seen breathing heavily. The protagonist looked at that person and noticed it was the same man who had been at the inn thinking about getting up, but didn't. The man stood in the designated spot to serve as the target for the experienced archer. Despite being afraid of going through with it and wanting to show his loyalty to Lord Roman, he was trembling and anxious. He looked at the archer, who was already about to release the arrow, and thought he couldn't back down. When the first arrow flew very close to his head, he thought about hesitating. Even more so when the arrow passed so near. He looked at the archer again. He thought that this time he should quit before it was too late, and another arrow whizzed past him. He thought there was still time, that he just had to run, but he froze in fear. Now he was looking at the archer, ready to fire one more arrow. When the archer released the third arrow, it was aimed lower, but it didn't hit the candidate. Hearing that he had passed, Henderson felt relieved. Meanwhile, the man with the scar on his face thought that if it had taken one more second, the candidate would have given up. And so the test continued, with more people being put to the test. Some passed, others gave up. At the end of that test, which had gone well aside from those who quit, there were still 400 candidates remaining. They were the ones who passed the first test. After that, only 120 remained. The protagonist himself announced that he had evaluated those who proved useful in the first test. Among them was Henderson, who had passed but had been trembling the entire time. Also present was the young man with the scar on his face, who passed without hesitation and saw it as just an exercise. The protagonist thought that both those who hesitated and those who performed flawlessly were equal. Both had the courage to overcome their fears, but he would still need to separate the gems from the ordinary stones. He stated that everyone had passed the first test. That test had proven that they were valid as warriors. He emphasized once again that only 30 would be chosen to become his subordinates. He mentioned that if they passed the test, they would live like predators. The protagonist's words struck the man with the scar on his face. Descending the steps, he said he would proceed with the second test and that the rules would be simple. He showed several swords lined up and said that, as they could see, there were many swords waiting for them. The choice of sword mattered. They could pick whichever they wanted and then prove their worth to him. They would have a duel with Lord Roman himself, who was already preparing with his own sword. Henderson was still terrified. The idea of dueling the Lord was dreadful. To the man with the scar, it would just be another test, and he thought the Lord was overestimating himself by wanting to fight them all. However, Bake was more than ready to face everyone for as long as it took. With that, one man took a deep breath and announced that he would be the first. That tall, bald man with a large scar was willing to take the initiative for everyone. The bald man, with a massive scar over his eye, showed great courage. He already had a sword in hand, standing face to face with Lord Roman. The protagonist looked directly at the man and asked for his name. He immediately replied that his name was Vulcan. Observing the way he held the sword, the protagonist asked if that one suited him. Vulcan looked at Roman and thought he was overly confident. To control the time and act as referee, there was an hourglass. The man looked at the Lord in front of him and thought he might pass if he could last 1 minute. As soon as Chris flipped the hourglass, he announced that the test had begun. Now that bald man wanted to engrave in his mind what kind of man would take the initiative to strike first. When he attacked, he noticed his opponent moved subtly. With that, his eyes widened, realizing that Lord Roman's movement was as precise as it was calm. Even so, he couldn't avoid falling to the ground after being swept by the Lord's foot. Now on the ground, he looked up at Roman, unable to understand how or when he lost. Without wasting time, Lord Roman placed his wooden sword at the opponent's neck, showing that he was the winner. Looking the man up and down, Lord Roman called for the next person to come forward for the test. In the audience, the man with the scar on his face watched the Lord and realized he was on another level. Now everyone knew that the test would be infinitely difficult, and that before them stood someone extremely prepared. The moment Vulcan lost, people immediately thought that Roman was incredibly strong. Because of that, everyone fought him with great caution, thinking that at some point, after many duels, the Lord before them might grow tired and his stamina would falter. However, 1 hour into the test had passed, and he still had the same sharpness as in the beginning. There had been a total of 60 duels, and even so, he kept defeating one after another. Each time he defeated someone, he immediately pointed his sword and asked for the next to begin the test. Everyone noticed that Lord Roman showed no signs of fatigue, and now they thought this test was even worse than the last. Some of them remembered what the Lord had said, that if they passed, they would become his subordinates. Now some finally understood what he meant when he said they could live the life of a predator. It was clear that Lord Roman was a predator who lived however he pleased, in a world where only the strong would survive. The soldiers who were there for the test knew that Roman's words were not empty. Everyone thought that this might be the only chance in their lives to become his subordinate. They didn't know how they could face the monster who remained prepared at all times. Since no one else stepped forward, he warned that if no more candidates came forward, they would all fail. Then one man spoke up. He would go himself, the man with the scar. He was ready with a small pouch at his belt for tough moments. He grabbed his wooden sword and stepped into position. He said he was candidate 61 and that his name was Lucas. When that man stood in front of the protagonist, he felt that Roman was a monster. Like everyone from the Dmitri family, Roman wasn't any less. He radiated an intense and powerful aura. That young man would have to put Roman's incredible skills aside and find a way to win. He knew that if Roman wanted to conquer the entire continent, he could certainly do it. Lucas didn't care at all about the 8 silver coins. He wanted to confirm if Roman was really a predator. Chris turned the hourglass, announcing the start of another duel. He placed the hourglass properly and told them to begin. The man believed he had to pass the test, so he took the initiative with the first attack. Everyone noticed that he advanced without hesitation. Chris observed that this was an interesting applicant. The way he held the sword indicated he was aiming for the head. He also had a dagger pointed at the Lord's heart. Even attacking with both weapons, the Lord before him merely dodged calmly, as he always did. Lucas noticed that the Lord simply stepped back slowly to avoid the dagger while defending against the sword. Now he had to take another approach, move faster, and show that he was prepared. However, Roman always blocked or dodged, and in one of those moves, Lucas lost his dagger. At that moment, he decided to use a different strategy, especially since he was now cornered by the Lord. He noticed that openings were usually easy to penetrate. However, the Lord showed none, which made it hard to attack him. Lucas thought that to last a minute, he would have to use everything he had to stay in the game. Noticing the young man's next steps, the protagonist wanted to be sure his name was indeed Lucas. He didn't think the man was that bad. He thought it was a good decision for the battlefield. It was clear that for a duel, it was a flawed strategy, but he didn't plan to let Lucas last a minute. A minute was just a barrier meant to show how incredible their Lord could be. The purpose of that test was to engrave that impression in their minds at the very first meeting, leaving no room for doubt. Already tired of the duel and close to the 1-minute mark, Roman decided to end it quickly. Lucas sensed the Lord's intent to finish the duel, so he took the initiative. After dodging and taking a few steps back, he thought about what he should do. He was a rank B mercenary, and his efforts had a limit. He knew that if he couldn't use mana, he would never be allowed into the rank A realm. The fundamental requirement for that was to awaken mana, but he had reached his limit. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get out of rank B, yet he kept fighting. He had survived countless battles in war zones, where people were being eliminated all the time. Thanks to his skills and a few tricks, he had always managed to do well and survive. He chose to do whatever it took to stay in that test and earn a spot as a subordinate. So he threw the contents of the pouch into the protagonist's eyes, who, even aware of it, didn't dodge. He didn't even blink when he realized sand was being thrown at him. But Chris, when he noticed what the opponent had done, simply couldn't believe it. Lucas thought it had been said that he only had to last a minute, and that there were no other rules, so he believed he was in the right. After throwing the sand, he planned to charge at the Lord with everything he had, assuming the sand in his eyes had left him confused. But as he rushed forward, he noticed that the Lord had never once averted his gaze, even with sand in his eyes. Because of that, he hesitated to attack the Lord, who merely watched how he behaved. Those large eyes, showing no hesitation, filled Lucas with anxiety. He noticed that the red eyes, despite the sand, were staring straight at him. With that, he decided to take a different path and avoid punishment. He dropped his wooden sword on the ground and announced that he was surrendering. Even that was difficult for him, and he clenched both fists. Bake belonged to the celestial demon god cult, and the first thing they taught was to keep your eyes open. In a combat situation where blows were exchanged, a single blink could mean death. Just as there was an order to breathe and circulate internal energy, blinking was considered a grave mistake. Therefore, such a trick would never work on Bake, who was trained to keep his eyes open at all times. Even in dangerous situations, he would never shut his eyes. Keeping the eyes open during a critical moment showed how focused the disciple was. At that moment, Lord Roman also kept his eyes open, even when sand was thrown in them. When Lucas realized that Lord Roman wouldn't blink and would keep staring, he regretted it and surrendered. Disciple and Knight Chris, who was nearby, handed over some water for the Lord to wash his eyes. While he did that, Lucas remained in a posture of regret, head lowered and eyes on the ground. He would never have used the sand if he had known it would end like that, and now he bit his lip in frustration. He had tried whatever he could to win, but the result had been pathetic. He looked at the Lord and wondered whether he had angered him enough to be punished, but the reaction was completely different from what he expected. Lord Roman simply ignored Lucas. When he called for the next participant, he made it clear that cheap shots were allowed. Everyone noticed that Lord Roman didn't get angry or even ask why Lucas had used such a dirty tactic, in a way that encouraged the others to adopt similar strategies. Bake had already known about Lucas's plan and had seen when he grabbed the stack of sand while dodging, but he didn't interfere, knowing that Lucas might have gone through real hell. He was also sure that in his days as a celestial demon, Lucas had faced countless hardships. That was how a celestial demon was forged, in the midst of an ocean of blood. After becoming serious, he asked if there were more applicants, while the hourglass kept spinning. The other competitors began looking for tactics just as dirty as Lucas's. Lord Roman continued defending himself gracefully, without punishing any of the participants' actions. The two-star Knight Chris, observing from a distance, noticed that Lucas had merely opened the path for the others. Now all the remaining applicants thought it was acceptable to use dirty tricks and other tactics. When they did that, Lord Roman showed his other side, one without mercy. That's what Lucas realized: fighting dirty wouldn't disqualify you, but the Lord would completely change. While the participant who used a cheap tactic was on the ground, after taking a stomp to the face, he screamed. The next one was called, while Lucas thought that if he hadn't given up, he would have ended up the same. Many expected the Lord to get tired, but he showed no signs of fatigue. Bake had also been trained to use breathing properly, inhale and exhale at the right moments. He used the natural mana obtained through this sequence of actions to circulate through the body and recover fatigue. With that body control, he strengthened his mind, his bones, and kept his body in an ideal state. He remembered the time he conquered the Murin, where he fought for 3 days and nights straight. There was no way he'd lose stamina in such simple fights. When the test ended, Chris asked everyone to gather so he could announce how many had passed the second test. Everyone heard that the number of winners was 0. However, that didn't mean there were no approved applicants. -30 out of 120 would be selected. After a while, Lord Roman handed the list of approved fighters to Chris, who would be responsible for training them. The two-star Knight, reviewing the list carefully, noticed that some applicants had done quite well. He understood why Volcan, the first to challenge the master, had passed. He had shown courage. But he couldn't understand how Henderson, who trembled and had no remarkable qualities, had also been approved. Aside from those cases, all the others made sense, but something still needed to be asked. He called Bake to find out if Lucas had also passed, and received confirmation from Lord Roman. Sensing the confusion, he asked Chris if there was a problem. Chris said the man was talented. However, he also believed Lucas could be dangerous, as he could use a dirty trick during the duel. He thought that it meant he might abandon his comrades on the battlefield. However, Lord Rowan explained that he had gone through exactly that because he used dirty tactics. They didn't understand, so Roman explained that Lucas could be a coward with no honor, but he was the only one who had used a different strategy. He was the kind of person who truly shined on the battlefield, because he wanted to survive at any cost. At that moment, Schurz remembered the words of his previous master, the captain of the Knights, who used to say almost the same thing. After every training session, he would tell Schurz to always keep that in mind, no matter how strong someone was. Now he realized that Lucas' decision had actually been very realistic at the time. He felt upset, recognizing that once again he had been close-minded. But he still had one more doubt and asked Lord Roman. He wanted to know why the rush, since there were still 5 months before they would go to the battlefield. He wanted to understand why the soldiers had been gathered so far in advance. Then came the official declaration from the Barco family, announcing war against the Lawrences. Now in their lands, the Barcos had gathered, believing the Lawrences' sin was failing to repay their debt. For weeks, they racked their brains trying to come up with a strategy to avoid total destruction. News of the war was transmitted to the people in Cairo through that declaration. Flora was already aware and was studying in the library, trying to find a way to counter the Barcos' attack with approval from the central government. After the territorial war against the Lawrences had begun, Chers found out and finally understood. The sovereign had warned that they would begin preparations to enter the war between the Barcos and Lawrences. After the arranged marriage with the Dmitri family ended, Flora felt guilty for bringing her family to ruin. She had constant nightmares, haunted by Roman's harsh words directed at her. She would wake up in the middle of the night, frightened, and find herself in her room. Sitting on her bed, she regretted everything that had happened, but knew she had to do something. Placing a hand on her face, she wondered what that sensation was. It felt like someone was speaking to her. The servants didn't know if it was due to the separation, but Flora stayed locked in her room all the time. She felt guilty for the impulsive decision she had made, acting only on rumors told by others. Now she constantly questioned her own intelligence. She remembered that she had completed an advanced level course at the academy with excellent grades, and from the warm smile her father always gave her, she believed he had always considered her a good daughter. Reality, however, showed her otherwise. She was nothing without her family, more than just a flower trapped in a greenhouse. Even if Roman Dmitri was considered a fool, he still had his moments of glory. Flora was not like that. She no longer had the confidence to face her own father. So she sat, thinking about what that man would do in such a situation. She wanted to think like Roman. She knew that no one had ever expected or wanted anything from him, yet he had subdued a gang with his own strength. And he had taken such action because of his own family. She thought he was strong for doing it alone. Now she also wanted to cast aside her feelings of inferiority and do something to help her family. Because when she compared herself to him, she saw that she was weak and had to change that situation. Meanwhile, the servants outside were knocking on the door, telling Miss Flora that her meal was ready. However, the servants looked at one another as the young lady hadn't left her room in days. On that specific day, she opened the door with a sad look, but there was a certain determination in her eyes. The servant, with a puzzled look, told Miss Flora that the meal was ready, but she said she was going to the library. Arriving at the library, she knew she had to do her best to support the family. That meant studying everything she could about the agreement between the Barco family and the Gold Bank. Just as Roman Dmitri had subdued the Blood Fang gang, she too had to choose a path to save her family. Meanwhile, Flora's father received terrible news in his office. Someone informed him that the Martel family had rejected the proposal, followed by the Vastra family, who also refused to help them at that moment. With that, the head of the Lawrence family realized he was alone in that war and that no one would take their side. He heard the messenger say that no matter what they did, it would be hard to gather support from neighboring regions. The head of the Lawrence family searched through books for a solution, despite the rumors. He observed that the Barcos were making it difficult for anyone to intervene in that conflict. Now the Lawrences had received notice that the Barcos had permission from the central government to declare war. Meanwhile, Flora was still in the library trying to gather information from books, but her time was short. Only 1 week remained until the war would break out. She believed that the best decision the Lorenzo family could make in that situation was to attempt a desperate measure. Meanwhile, her father said that because of those bastards, they could no longer receive help from any neighboring territories. There was also no contact from the Gold Bank. They said it could take over a week before they responded. The Viscount of Lorento knew he didn't have that much time before war exploded against the Barcos. In that meeting, no one had an apparent solution to the problem. Someone said it might be better to surrender to avoid greater losses, since all help from neighboring regions had been blocked because of the Barcos and the difference in troops was significant. They argued it was better to preserve as much land as possible instead of fighting and losing everything. The atmosphere in that office was one of total defeat. No one knew a way to resist. Meanwhile, the Viscount was ready to accept surrender. However, it was announced that Miss Flora was requesting a meeting with the Viscount. Even after being denied entry, Flora entered the meeting room. Defying her father's orders, the Viscount didn't know what his daughter could possibly add to the meeting, until Flora began to speak, believing she urgently needed to talk to him. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Roman declared that he intended to get involved in the war. When speaking with his father, he announced that in the war between the Barcos and the Lorentos, he, Roman Dmitri, would interfere. His worried father asked if he understood what that meant, but Roman said he fully understood. Angrily, his father asked if he knew what would happen. Why would he still consider getting involved? The war was between the Barcos and the Lorentos, a legitimate battle sanctioned by the approval of the central government. With a cold gaze, his father said that now that Roman had broken off the engagement with the Lorenzo daughter, he had no more right. Placing his hand on his head, he said that if Roman was thinking of helping the Lorentos out of a simple change of heart, he should not do it. However, the son said he wanted to start taking charge of his own life immediately. Roman said that, to be honest, he was being threatened by the eldest son of the Barco family, Anthony Barco. Still in the mansion, he said people claimed the Dmitris were the true greatest power in the Northeast. The Barcos thought they were above them. His father couldn't believe the wise words being directed at him. Bake, looking at his father, said that Roman Dmitri was different. He was warning about power and would not stand still. The name of the Dmitris was being tarnished, whether by the Barcos or anyone else. They would never accept that. He explained there were many reasons, such as the fact that the Barcos had declared war for no real cause. Bake knew he needed to live a life of dominance, just like in the other life. This time, he would be powerful. Now, Roman stated that he wasn't asking for the Dmitri family's interference or strength. He would do everything on his own. Even so, he wanted his father to watch over him. The path he would show was the life he intended to live from now on. His father remembered when he was younger and knew that the fact he was a commoner would never change. He spoke with his wife, who wanted to know what had happened with the other nobles when he went to the capital. He told her that by the way they communicated among themselves and by their glances, they didn't consider him a noble. Those were not the eyes of someone looking at another noble as an equal. The woman asked if he wanted to change. He replied that he didn't want to change. He was fine with the life he had and didn't want to change it. However, he wished for his children to be different from him and was content ruling over a remote and small land. He didn't even want them to exceed their limits with their own hands and conquer something greater. Now he looked at his son Roman, who had the eyes of someone who could never be persuaded, but carried within him the cunning and leadership from his past life, and now he would rule as Roman Dmitri. The father looked at his hands, thinking he had dreamed of that moment his entire life. It was that hard-working child who had grown so much, and he hadn't even noticed when the change happened. Looking at his son, he told him to do whatever he wanted and to speak up whenever he needed anything. He said he was Roman of Mitre, his beloved son, just as he was Romero Dmitri, his father. He said that no matter what he did, there was no reason not to take full responsibility for it. After the conversation with his father, Roman arrived at the blacksmith's village, the place where forging happened in that kingdom. Looking around, it seemed like it wasn't just flattery when people said the Dmitri forges were the best. Workshops where multiple blacksmiths worked together. There were 30 workshops on just one street. Everywhere he looked, there were blacksmiths working. Any doubts about how Dmitri accumulated wealth were? They would be resolved just by looking at that lively street filled with forges. The iron mine behind the estate had the richest deposit of iron in the entire kingdom. The blacksmiths of Dmitri had the skill to sell all the mined iron at a high price. Because of that, the northeastern nobles of Cairo avoided becoming hostile toward Dmitri. Roman Dmitri was not welcome in that place, just like in many others. There was a man there who could be called the symbol of the Dmitri family, the master blacksmith. In a conversation with Roman, his father had asked him to seek out the master blacksmith Endrick. Before becoming a baron, Romero had been a master smith, but the title had been passed on to Endrick, his successor. He said that if he mentioned it was a request from him, Endrick would provide whatever was necessary. Romero also said there was something Roman needed to keep in mind when going there. He explained that if Roman was skilled, he could earn the trust of the blacksmiths. When he arrived, all the blacksmiths frowned at Bake, since they saw him as representing Roman Dmitri. The protagonist knew that, given Roman's previous actions, it wasn't surprising they were hostile. As soon as he entered looking for Endrick, he found the man with a stern expression. The protagonist realized that man was Master Endrick. He said that, at his father's request, he had come to get equipment for 30 soldiers. The man gruffly asked if he was there to steal something again, if he was short on money for entertainment, like drinks and women. Then he looked to the side and said he could take anything from that corner. The protagonist asked if he meant he could take that trash. He then asked the master blacksmith if that was the best he had. He crouched down and picked up a sword from among the scraps. He handed it over and said the reputation of Dmitri's metalwork being the best in Cairo seemed exaggerated. Damn, it was a disgrace for a blacksmith to call that gear. Looking into the head blacksmith's face, he asked again if that was really the best he had. He wanted to know if that truly was the best Master Endrick could produce, just trash and scrap. Curious, the blacksmith said that Roman had never shed a drop of sweat in front of a forge. He had no right to judge Dmitri's metalwork. He was only helping because the Baron had asked. Pointing at Roman, he said he was just the eldest son who didn't know how to do anything. Roman looked at the man and said he understood the anger Endrick felt toward him. Looking at the sword, he said it had been hammered with disproportionate force during the forging process. As a master, Endrick couldn't deny that fact, so he preferred to insult him rather than admit it was garbage. The blacksmith noticed that the young man was different. He said that with that dull-edged sword, it would be impossible to make a clean cut in anything. Looking at Endrick, he said it would be terrible if soldiers had to rely on that trash to survive. He then picked up a piece of armor and said armor was made to protect, but that one was useless. He said that if he hadn't realized the material was garbage, the soldiers' lives would be at risk. He stated that this wasn't just a personal retaliation born from grudges. Roman continued, saying that if the blacksmith took pride in calling himself a craftsman, he would never have made that. Looking into the man's eyes, he declared that such trash could lead to people's death. He said that the blacksmith's personal intentions didn't matter. Holding the sword, he declared that it had been requested in the name of Baron Romero, and treating it like that was personal disrespect toward the Baron. He said it should be interpreted as an act of insubordination against Baron Romero. He was sure that Endrick's intention wasn't to disobey his father, he just didn't want to give Roman the best. He reminded him that this wasn't a personal request, but an order from the lord of those lands. He told the craftsman to remember the hierarchy, the times when the lines between lord and subordinate became ambiguous. That was why Roman said he would ask again whether he should treat these actions as insubordination toward his father. Quickly, other craftsmen heard the argument and began approaching as Roman demanded an explanation. Now the craftsman wanted to know what all the commotion was and what kind of mess Roman was making this time. Then they asked that bastard to simply leave Master Endrick alone. When they saw Roman's hands holding a sword, they thought he was threatening Endrick. So they became even more hostile than before and wanted him to explain himself. They even wanted to arrest him. However, the protagonist remained where he was, staring Blacksmith Endrick in the eyes. The blacksmith couldn't take it anymore and asked everyone to stop, admitting that it was all his fault and asked Roman to leave. Feeling the weight of Bach's wise words, he apologized. He was the only one to blame for everything, and with that, he remembered the time long ago when he had been punished by the master craftsman of the era. At the time, Endrick was young and had secretly made his first sword, which he had been told to throw away. When doing his duties, he would complain to himself, thinking the master craftsman was being too harsh on him. While he was outside, he heard a noise. It seemed the master craftsman had refused to sell a sword to someone. The person had little money and couldn't pay enough for the sword he wanted. So the master craftsman refused and said the weapon the man wanted cost at least twice as much. Getting closer to listen better, Endrick heard the man begging at the door for a sword. However, Endrick heard the master kicking the man out for not having enough money to pay for the weapon. When that man left, he felt defeated because he wanted a sword to work and take care of his family. Endrick went to get his sword, which he had kept instead of throwing away, and called out to the man. He showed him the sword he had made and gave it to him for free. The man even tried to offer the silver coin he had, but Endrick said it wasn't necessary. That man who received the sword for free felt deeply grateful. He said he would never forget the grateful smile that person gave when receiving the sword. Endrick felt fulfilled just seeing how satisfied someone was. But Endrick's joy didn't last long, as he later learned that the man had died. The man had been killed, and people didn't quite know why, since he was a great swordsman. While Endrick was near people, he heard everyone saying it was because of the sword. The man had been escorting a merchant when he was ambushed by bandits. He had to fight, and his sword broke. That's why people talked about the importance of having good and reliable weapons. That day, Endrick understood what his master had been trying to say, and he felt like it was no different than if he himself had killed that man. So that day, he promised that moment would never repeat itself. Now Endrick closed his eyes and thought that once again, he had been about to make the same mistake. So he was ready to pay for his actions, both now and in the past, and said he was willing to take responsibility for his mistakes. And when Roman heard this, he said Endrick could return to business, as he knew Endrick was the best blacksmith around. That's why he decided to trust him to make the equipment for 30 soldiers in total. Roman wanted the mistakes between him and the blacksmith to be buried so that both could move forward. Blacksmith Endrick looked at Lord Roman and couldn't imagine how someone could change so much. He understood that man couldn't be the same Roman as before, so he spoke again, but this time with a different attitude, saying he regretted everything and promised it wouldn't happen again. He said that as a way of apologizing, he would make the weapons and armor for the soldiers, and they would be of the best quality. Under Blacksmith Endrick's command, the forge was lit, and all the surrounding blacksmiths worked diligently. Meanwhile, Roman was hearing about the reason Endrick disliked him. Another blacksmith said that some time ago, Roman had stolen Master Endrick's masterpiece. It was the first sword Endrick had ever made, and Roman had fixed it and sold it on the merchant street for a ridiculously low price. That sword he sold was the master's masterpiece. It had taken Endrick more than 3 months to complete it. That's why the blacksmith was saying Roman could never understand how the master had felt. Bake realized that it had been Roman who crossed the line first. While walking, he heard someone call out to him, so he turned and saw that it was Endrick. He told the master that Roman had forgiven him for that previous matter, had accepted the apology because he knew he was wrong. But he didn't want the eldest son of the Dmitri family to be completely negligent about matters of the forge. The man wanted Roman to remember that the foundation of Dmitri came through the forge. After leaving the forge, Roman went to the place where he had trained. Upon entering, he noticed the shed was just as he had asked. Hans had done everything as requested. Upon entering the place, he realized it had been a long time since he had been there. Now it had become a workshop. He could work and train alone, and it had been cleaned and organized. All the tools he had asked for were in place, and the forge had been built. After lighting the forge, he thought it was time to begin. When he was in the Murem, he had learned at age 18 when he decided to forge his first sword. While the successor had not yet been decided, his 11th brother, Baek Chan Juan, ambushed him while he was living his own life. That was an intense fight, but his treasured sword, already damaged, couldn't withstand his brother's attacks. Even so, Baek used all his fury to strike his brother and ensure his own survival. While fighting with a broken sword and escaping the edge of death, he thought to himself, he needed a sword that would never break and would fully draw out the potential of his physique. That's why he needed a sword made just for him. After that day, unlike his brothers, he visited the blacksmith and learned to forge. After every decisive battle, he would forge the perfect sword for his current moment. After making 39 swords, the celestial demon sword was born, a treasure beyond price. At this moment, he would have to make another one to prepare for the coming war. So he would forge his own sword using the tools left for him, and he began to sweat at the forge. The act of repeating the same motion many times while applying a certain rhythm of strength was essential to the process. The movement where one concentrates on a single objective is called a trance, and the protagonist was exactly in that state, completely focused on creating the best sword suited for the moment he was living in. With each step, he saw his weapon gradually taking perfect form. He had to survive in a world ruled by the law of the strongest because he was the celestial demon. He never saw this as a bad thing and liked the reality he was living in, since he had stood firm in it. However, the state he was in wasn't high enough to oppose every variable. That's why he needed to train to become stronger. There were powerful forces in Roman's world. Baek knew he had yet to face such forces, and to him, defeat was something that should never be tolerated. So he drew in a deep breath and decided to use his infernal divine art technique to forge the best weapon for his best moment. That martial art was once used by someone known as the Flame Demon, who wielded the power of blazing fire. It was meant to quickly accumulate mana, an ideal technique for his current state, which he considered useless. But he had to be cautious, because if used for too long, it would damage his lungs. He knew he desired a power capable of standing against every variable. Meanwhile, in Lawrence, Flora tried to assert herself in the meeting, saying they had reached a deadlock. Help had been limited to those around them, and the military disparity between them and their enemies was obvious. She said there had been talks about surrendering in exchange for keeping a small portion of their land. However, she didn't believe that was something they should accept, no matter the cost. The Viscount, listening to his daughter without interrupting the meeting, could no longer stay silent. He wasn't willing to lose lives in a war. Flora believed the Barcos had used their connections with the central government to secure a loan from the Gold Bank. And if that were true, the loan was processed as an unsecured loan. An unsecured loan should have a very high interest rate. She said that war wasn't something that would only benefit the Barcos. While the Barcos borrowed money, the Gold Bank was the one financing it. To gain rewards, both sides benefited, and they would destroy that land while the Lawrences were still there. That was the point Flora wanted to make clear to everyone. No matter what they did, they had to resist. Her father wanted to know if she had any plan for the resistance she was proposing. The Viscount's daughter showed great determination and said there was only one way forward. They had to mount a desperate resistance. This was the only path for Loren's survival. The Viscount trembled just imagining resistance, but for a moment he lowered his head and thought. Because of recent events, he had lost faith in Flora, but her words had some merit. He began to think that Flora had the discernment to see through situations and present an extraordinary countermeasure. But he was still just at the level of common sense, so he decided to listen to Flora, since he himself had no better idea. So he ordered the gates to be shut. It was the best way to survive. Flora warned that she wasn't just saying to hold out, but to give up everything they had produced that year and burn the fields. They should also stockpile every kind of food they could to last until winter arrived. The Viscount didn't understand her point of view about holding out until winter. She believed that even if the Barcos had managed to secure a large amount of money, that move would fail eventually because interest would keep increasing over time. The massive power of influence that had spread across the entire continent was the Gold Bank. And if the war didn't end soon and continued to drag on, they would start being pressured by the Barco family's interest rates. Everyone listened as Flora said that the Gold Bank wasn't a power that could be pressured just because they had a connection. She said the Mercenary had acted only for money, and the money came from the Gold Bank. She was right to say that when winter arrived, the war's siege would no longer be advantageous. They would inevitably become exhausted, and that was the point Flora wanted everyone to understand. Looking at her, the Viscount couldn't imagine when his daughter had begun having thoughts like that. In the now livelier meeting, they discussed the battle of attrition against the Barcos. As he watched everyone at the meeting with something to discuss, he thought about how his daughter had grown. He believed that because of the incident with the Dmitris, he had thought he was raising a very immature daughter. But in that case, she showed that she had grown through her own mistakes and was demonstrating maturity. With that, the Viscount slammed the table and told everyone that Flora was right and they would begin preparations immediately. They would do everything they could for a desperate resistance. They would start stockpiling weapons and food. They would just have to hold on, and then hold on a little more, to keep the Lorenzo family lineage alive. Even if the castle walls collapsed and they perished, everyone was determined to fight to the end. All would continue enduring and fighting to the bitter end, and Flora was among them, showing the same resolve. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the protagonist was still at the forge. He had made some swords and continued the process, testing their durability. No matter who it was, the first one was always special, and as soon as he finished the sword, he felt motivated. He took it outside and under the sunlight, saw how beautiful the sword was, perfect for his current moment. He thought the sword's name should also be borrowed from that world, so he named his sword Salamander as it matched that place. While the Viscount was inside the castle, standing atop the wall, he listened to the messenger telling him his options. He said they could also choose a battle between warriors to avoid putting everyone at risk. The messenger explained that the method of the battle could be anything they chose, and they would proceed accordingly. With that, the Viscount looked down and listened to what the messenger was saying. Having his answer ready, he said they didn't believe in the Barco's cause. To proclaim that war, claiming it was justified by a debt, the document proclaiming it, made by the ancestors, was forged. He also said he had no intention of sacrificing the life of a single person from Lawrence. The Viscount told the messenger to repeat to the Barcos the same words he had heard. When the messenger mentioned the third option, which was to abandon the pride of a royal family member, he said that if they continued the desperate resistance within the castle walls, the situation would become even worse. The messenger declared that from that point on, the Barco family would respect their decision. Now the debt would be collected through war, and the siege would be tightened soon. As the messenger turned his back, the guards within the Lawrence territory trembled at the thought of war. The Viscount watched from afar, atop the castle, and realized that war was inevitable. Meanwhile, the messenger informed everyone that the war had already begun. Now the Laurentos were trying, as best they could, to defend their territory with arrows. However, the Barcos were holding strong. The order was not to retreat and to advance as much as possible. Even with that rain of arrows, they would not give up. The command was to press on until the invasion. However, the leader of the Barcos couldn't believe the Lorenzos had chosen war. He knew the Barcos had prepared 3 times as many soldiers as the Lorenzos. They had done that because they expected the battle to last only about an hour or so. But the pace of the battle turned out differently than expected. It seemed the Lorenzos had already finished their preparations for that battle. The messenger told the Barcos leader that they had dug a deep trench to limit the soldiers' access, and by the seemingly unlimited number of arrows being fired since the beginning, they had clearly been prepared. Weapons and war supplies more than enough. The leader couldn't believe it had all been done in just 1 week. He also couldn't believe that the Lorenzos had chosen desperate resistance. By their calculations, they should have surrendered to protect as much land as possible, even if just a small portion. The problem for that leader was that they had changed their minds, risking extermination, and locked the castle gates. Now the leader wanted to know where they had gone wrong, but the young man just looked at him, waiting for an order, and the order was to use their secret weapon, as they now had permission to do so. With that, the young knight could hardly believe he would finally use the Barco's ultimate weapon. Smiling, the Barco leader believed that the Viscount of Lawrence was not a determined man. He had sold his precious daughter to the Dmitri family, unable to withstand the pressure from the Barcos. He concluded that the man was the type to flee like a coward in times of crisis. However, the Viscount was with his guards, asking everyone to stay focused and prepare their weapons. That man was driven by the courage his daughter had shown. He believed Flora had been right from the beginning. He thought the Barcos were shaken, and that was why they had temporarily retreated, just as she had predicted. Flora said she realized she needed to become stronger. As she spoke, a great light appeared. The irrefutable evidence showed that the Barcos were attacking once again. This time, they managed to inflict heavy damage on the castle wall. Looking from above, they saw that the wall would collapse if that weapon continued to fire. The Lawrences realized the Barcos were using flare, a magical weapon, to attack the castle. The Lawrence soldiers thought it was insane. Maybe the Barcos had indeed prepared a flare. That weapon was a catapult that launched a massive magical explosion against the castle walls. Each shot cost dozens of gold coins. That's why it was considered a strategic weapon. It could not be used without permission from the central government, no matter how much gold one possessed. They couldn't believe the Barcos had the connections and wealth to rent a flare. They thought there were only 2 ways to block a flare shot. The first was to counterattack with a weapon of the same rank. The second was to leave the castle and destroy it. Both options seemed impossible. While she pondered what to do, someone announced they had received a magical call. She listened carefully to the message and watched the maid deliver the announcement. It was a magical call from Roman Mitri, who asked to send a message to the young lady. He said he had a way to help, so she should accept his call. As soon as Flora heard that Roman Mitri was helping, a glimmer of hope began to rise. Now through the magical call, Flora asked Roman how he was planning to help them. She wanted to know how he could get the Lawrences out of danger. The protagonist warned that he would be honest with her, revealing that he intended to take revenge on the Barco family for personal reasons. He said it was already decided, and all that remained was the timing of the revenge. He told her that if the Lawrence family followed his plan, he could begin and destroy the Barco family. Immediately, Flora asked what role they would need to play in this plan. The protagonist explained that it was simple. The Lawrence family needed to prepare the stage for him by making a sacrifice. He said she would need to give up everything guaranteed to her as the daughter of a noble. Only then could he intervene. Trembling, she placed her hand over her armor and kept listening to what Roman had to say. He said that if the day she was touched came before the separation, then that made her one of his people, and he declared that he would never forgive anyone who laid a hand on one of his own. Upon hearing that she could be one of his people, Flora immediately felt protected. As she spoke with Roman, the magical weapon continued destroying the castle walls. The soldiers had already reported that the wall had collapsed and that they needed to prepare the gates. Meanwhile, Flora assured Roman she would meet any condition he imposed. She begged him to exterminate every last one of the Barcos. At the same time, the enemies were advancing and already attempting to climb what remained of the walls. Some mercenaries were trying to scale them to prepare an ambush against the Viscount. A soldier noticed in time and warned that the Viscount was in danger. But what that mercenary didn't expect was that Flora would arrive just in time to protect her father. She precisely blocked the opponent's attack, countered, and threw him far away. The father could hardly believe it, seeing his daughter so determined, acting like a true soldier. As he looked at Flora, he heard her say that they should open the castle gates and face the Barcos head-on. He thought it was madness, but she told him that Roman Mitri had promised to help them. Meanwhile, Roman and his men were already marching toward Lawrence territory. The time for the soldiers to risk their lives had come earlier than planned. In that case, uncertainty and anxiety clashed with the harsh reality they would have to face. Everyone was to remember Roman's words. If they survived as his soldiers, he would promise them the life of a predator. But in the end, what would ensure survival that day was willpower. He explained that the main operation would be from the rear. They were supposed to attack the rear of the Barcos and destroy the siege weapon. He stated that he didn't expect much from any of them. He said he would take the Vanguard himself and do everything alone, claiming he would massacre the enemies. So all they had to do was follow him and take whatever was left. However, they could not forget the top priority, which was to destroy the siege weapon. With that, the Barco commander observed that small number of Mitri soldiers. The order came from the Barco leader. They were to exterminate the crazy guest immediately. Thus, everyone prepared, and Roman charged ahead alone to deal with them all. On his black horse, he raised his sword against the Barco soldiers. He passed through them as if none posed a threat. There was a saying among the people of the Orthodox Murim sect. They said the heavenly demon was always at the vanguard of the demonic cult. They claimed the heavenly demon was invincible, and facing him head-on was madness. People wondered why he would place himself in such a dangerous position, even after becoming the heavenly demon. Bake, both in the past and at that moment, did everything for the same reason. He knew that the strongest always had to completely crush the enemy's morale from the vanguard. So looking at the soldiers, he said that if they wouldn't come to him, he would go after all of them. This caused such fear among the soldiers that it seemed to shake their very bones. Even so, everyone had to do as instructed and attack. Chris noticed when the siege began closing in on those soldiers as well. He ordered his companions to counterattack. Everyone knew that there was a huge reward at stake in that mission. Since the future of the Beige Mercenary Company was on the line, the leader would handle them personally. With that, the leader tried to face Bake head-on, believing he could defeat him because he was a rank A mercenary. Unlike B-rank mercenaries, someone only reached A rank after learning to use aura. Because of that, Burr was a 2-star aura knight and believed he would be a match for Roman Mitri. But when they stood face to face, he realized Roman was monstrously dangerous, and he wasn't the least bit intimidated by the presence of an A-rank mercenary. The mercenary understood just how powerful the eldest Mitri son was and realized he wouldn't come out of that unscathed. All that mercenary could endure was 5 seconds. After that, he collapsed, Now everyone knew that 5 seconds was the time an A-rank mercenary could last against Roman. With the leader defeated, everyone began to fear for their own lives. Meanwhile, on Roman's side, his team, Chris and Kevin, were incredibly satisfied. The Barco leader, seeing all that, ordered his soldiers to attack Roman to eliminate him. Everyone tried to convince that lord that it was far too dangerous to go against Roman himself. While Bake watched that leader throwing a tantrum in front of his men, he just stared at him. He was interested in something else. His target at that moment was the flare weapon, a product of a magic that didn't exist in his world, but that wouldn't stop Roman from destroying it, and using his divine heavenly demon art to shatter it. With the destruction of the weapon, the Barcos, who would lose their main weapon, had no other choice. They had to retreat, even against the leader's wishes, because there was no other suitable option. In that battle, Chris used his aura differently than usual. He did his best to control the energy. He acted the way Roman had done before, and his energy consumption wasn't high. Even in the heat of battle, he had been ridiculed by others for following Roman, but Chris was growing. He himself recognized that he had changed during the time he had followed Roman. He realized that his sovereign's methods were the best for that moment. However, when he looked at the other soldiers, he noticed something strange. All of them, without exception, were very tired. Chris, so as not to be isolated, followed his sovereign. But Chris was satisfied, because not one of the 30 soldiers had been left behind, even though they were exhausted. Also, none of them were injured. That was the reason Lord Roman had chosen each of them. But there was a single reason why they had all been saved and kept safe. They were all following a monster who understood the logic of war and had ensured everyone remained alive. Roman looked at them and told everyone they had done a good job staying alive. After the Barcos retreated, the gates were opened, and Roman and his soldiers were allowed in. Within the gates of Lawrence territory, Roman Mitri was warmly welcomed. Everyone shouted and congratulated that heroic act of Roman on behalf of the Lawrences. Meanwhile, the Viscount looked at the young man and felt ashamed. He thought he had realized that Roman was someone special the moment they met, but never imagined he would destroy the flare. He looked at that young man and realized he had an impressive talent. Mitri had given birth to a tiger. If things hadn't gone wrong, that tiger would have become part of the Viscount's family. He thought it was a misfortune, but that was already in the past. Stabilizing Roman and calling him a hero, the Viscount thanked him for the tremendous help received. He extended his hand to the young man, surely happy to see him again. Bake knew how to form strong bonds, so he accepted the handshake from the Viscount. While Roman was in the hallway, about to enter the meeting room, Flora stepped in. She wanted to thank Roman for keeping his word and going to protect everyone as he had promised. She also apologized for not being able to act properly in her role as bait. Because of that, she wanted to thank him for having done more than he said he would. However, Roman told her that he had only done his part of the agreement. He made it clear that the Lawrences acted exactly as he had expected, since he hadn't expected much from them. The girl said she understood, but still wanted to repay the favor, no matter what it took. She told Roman that she represented the Lawrences, and if he desired anything, he should make his wish known. She said she would take his side and ensure he received it, regardless of what might happen to her. He smiled and told her that if that was her will to repay him, and if she didn't waver, he would accept it. After that, he placed his hand on the door to open it, telling her they would now enter the conference room. Inside, the meeting was steady, now with a new hope. Roman was on the Lawrence side. He listened as others said this was an opportunity, and that if they proposed an end to the situation, they would accept it. The Viscount said they should leave the past behind and look toward a future full of peace. Meanwhile, Bake looked at the Lawrences and thought they were all herbivores. That was why the Viscount was satisfied and said he agreed with the opinions heard, but there was a limit to what they could achieve. Then Roman announced that he wanted to intervene in the conversation and asked permission to speak. When he spoke, everyone became tense, and the room fell silent, awaiting his words. Without giving thanks, he stood up and began to speak about his position. He said the Barcos were currently under financial pressure to pay a large sum. They had no other option but to take the Lawrences, and that wouldn't change even with the flare destroyed. That's why he dared to make a prediction. They would receive the messenger's head in return. With that, everyone in the meeting hesitated, and certainly no one volunteered to send the message. Roman looked at the Viscount and said the soldiers were still carrying the wounded outside. He stated that the Barcos should be punished and that they should show the world the strength of the Lawrences. Roman said they needed to show how they would take revenge on those brutes who dared lay hands on the Lawrences. The Viscount said it wasn't like he didn't understand the situation, but asked what they could do while lacking strength. Roman replied that there was only one way. When he looked at the Viscount and revealed his full aggressive intent, the pressure was too overwhelming for the man to bear. Roman's eyes showed that herbivores had no choice but to become prey to wild beasts. Meanwhile, the Barco leader was furious, not knowing why Roman would meddle in that situation. As a result, the situation turned against him, and there was nothing he could do. Just like the Barco leader, Roman also believed that everything now depended on a single combat. They would have to hold a duel between warriors. It would be a clash between the two families. The Viscount thought it was strange, since it had been a long time since warrior battles had deteriorated. The opponents were the Barcos, who had connections with the central government and an excessive amount of money. Because of that, the Viscount found it impossible to predict which master they might invite to participate in the battle. Lake understood the Viscount's perspective, but from that moment on, he himself would handle it with certainty. He then observed the Viscount and his daughter Flora. The Viscount asked Lord Roman if he was sure about what he was proposing. Bake, used to battles and victories, assured him that nothing was better than a warrior's duel. He said the Barcos had a 3-star knight, who would likely be first in line. So Roman announced that he would represent Lawrence and be the first warrior. It didn't matter if the opponent was a Barco warrior or an extreme master. He guaranteed victory. He also stated that, in the end, no matter how skilled a warrior was, if he lost twice, nothing else mattered. He explained that the first battle would be decided by his subordinate, Chris, a 2-star knight. He said that Chris would be able to restore the Lawrence's reputation, which was currently in ruins. So he kept looking at Flora, who simply watched attentively as Roman spoke. He said that Lawrence should make the choice, and it seemed like he was speaking directly to Flora. He realized the hint was aimed at her because of the conversation they had earlier when she had offered to stand by his side. She remembered saying that if there was something he wanted, all he had to do was express his will at the conference. Now looking at him, she realized the moment had finally arrived, and this was what he wanted. As he looked at her, she felt all the pressure Bake could cause with just a single glance. She realized he was offering himself as a warrior so that Lawrence could handle any variables. She knew he was truly a dangerous man, especially because of the actions he had been taking. Even so, she decided to keep her word because she had already said she would agree. That's why she stated she was in favor of the warrior battle. With that, they ordered the messenger to deliver the response to the Barcos and to the judge. After the message was sent, the duel was scheduled to occur after 1 week. The judge presented himself. He was the Count of Arts, and there, a warrior battle would take place, a sacred event. The judge said that the event would be blessed by Valhalla, as determined by the warrior judge. He continued by stating that regardless of the outcome, both sides would have to agree with it, and anyone who violated that mandate would be judged by the honor of the Kingdom of Cairo. The judge would summon both sides to designate 3 warriors who would represent their land and present a list. While everything was being arranged at the Barco table, they were celebrating and drinking wine. Lord Roman looked at them and noticed they didn't seem worried about the interest rate. Just like he himself had expected them to be, it looked like the order of entry would have to change. Roman informed the Viscount, who didn't understand what he meant, since that had been decided a week ago. Roman explained that this was the problem. The Barcos should be feeling more and more pressure from the interest. It seemed like the Barco family was delaying everything on purpose and didn't show any anxiety at all. After Roman spoke, the Viscount looked at the Barco leaders and realized they were hiding something. They might have an ace up their sleeve, maybe a powerful and extreme master hired for the duel. While the Viscount imagined that, Bake already knew. He had seen the aura of the master sitting in the chair. The Viscount asked Roman if he wanted to change the plan, and Roman replied that first, he wanted to secure the victory. Then a Lawrence knight would come in, and Chris would be the last to close the tournament. Now it would be different. Chris would go first, and when that was decided, they were terrified. Flora and the Viscount didn't understand the point Roman was making to them. Bake had everything in mind, and would face the card the Barcos had prepared. He was determined to change the plan to one of domination, and now everyone was watching. At the center of that field stood Chris and the opponent chosen by the Barco family. The first Barco warrior introduced himself, saying his name was Jansen, a 3-star aura knight. On the Lawrence side, Chris represented them, a 2-star aura knight. They observed Jonathan's pupil and knew Chris was the genius of the northeastern region. They knew risks had to be taken constantly if he wanted to become strong. That was the reason he had left the circle of knights to follow Lord Roman. In an instant, the battle began, and the 2 experienced knights started dueling. Chris realized something when he fought against the Lord. No matter how strong the aura was, all that mattered was landing a hit on the opponent. Chris was willing to dodge, run, and find a single opportunity to turn into victory. Jansen asked Chris how much longer he planned to keep dodging and running like a fool. When the warrior finally left an opening for Chris, he noticed it. He knew the wide-range aura was coming straight at him, and he wouldn't be able to dodge in time. He had to think fast about what to do, and then he remembered Lord Roman's words. He said that the distance from worldly logic was a reckless release of mana, and wouldn't reflect the full aura. So he realized that the strength the Lord had shown with a small amount of mana was focused on directing the flow into a line, and from there, that line into a point. All he needed was to focus the power of his aura. With that, he blocked, believing it was his only option, and once he did, he managed to separate that man's head from his body. With that, he declared his victory, the first for the Lawrence team. When everyone realized he had won, the Lawrence crowd shouted his name. Even he couldn't believe that a 2-star knight had defeated a 3-star one. As for Lord Roman, he looked at Chris and had already expected that result, since Chris had been trained by the Lord himself. For everyone watching, the battle was impressive, seeing a 2-star knight defeat a 3-star one. However, for the Barcos, it was hard to accept that someone as surprising as Jansen had lost to a nobody. Now the Barco leader needed to change his strategy and planned to end the match in 2 rounds. He was determined to play his trump card, knowing there was no reason to worry. 2 matches remained, and he would win. He believed that with the pieces he had, he could make up for the fortune spent hiring the guild. One of the warriors went to call the fighter who would be the key piece in the Barcos battle. That man, in whom everyone placed great faith, climbed the stairs still yawning. He was introduced as Homero, who would fight for the Barcos, a 4-star knight. That presence frightened Knight Chris, as well as the Viscount of Lawrence, and even Flora was startled. Everyone wanted to know what someone of such high rank was doing there. Many thought they would never see him with their own eyes. Homero was ranked 49 and was there only at the request of the guild master. Ranking warriors originally came from the Valhalla Empire. In that sanctuary, it was believed that those who died honorably would go to a better place. That's why every warrior wished to be recognized and have their battle results recorded by Valhalla. After the system changed, their strength began to be measured by rank. The top 100 participated in the Valhalla ranking. The Viscount of Lawrence never expected the Barcos to send Homero as their warrior. He wandered the kingdom, revealing himself only in battles against the strong, but his full strength was unknown. He was also called the Wandering Swordsman, and rumors said he aimed to reach rank 30. Many knew he had recently reached the 4-star rank and believed the battle was lost. Looking at Roman, the Viscount thought it was a shame. They had won the first round, but now had no more chance. To the despair of that warrior, he would be fighting Lord Roman himself. Upon learning that his opponent was a 4-star or a knight, Roman became immediately interested. He had investigated all of the Barcos' moves through an information guild. He didn't know for sure what the Barcos' hidden card was, but now he knew. It was that man. Homero caught Black's attention, who now had to prove he was truly strong. He quickly realized that the opponent was hiding his true strength, and they also didn't know how strong Roman really was. This was the chance to fight against the kind of strong men he had only read about in books. But Flora grabbed Roman's arm. She said the opponent was Homero, rank 49, and she was afraid something would happen to him. She begged Roman to value his life, even if it meant surrendering. She wanted him to forfeit and hope to win the next match. When warrior Roman looked at Flora, he noticed her eyes were like flames. He wasn't looking at her like someone absolute. At least that's what the fighter thought. Flora said now was the time to deal with that variable, so she wanted to send some other knight in his place. She insisted there was no reason for him to risk his life in a lost battle. Roman didn't like that talk. He pulled Flora's arm to stop her from holding on. He said she didn't need to explain herself to anyone, that she should go her own way and not interfere. He introduced himself to the judge, saying he was Roman Mitri of Lawrence. He held tightly to the hilt of the sword he had forged himself and was willing and ready to begin the fight. Just like his rival, he was also ready to start. The opponent thought that if Roman was strong enough to destroy the flare, then he must be a 2-star knight. He couldn't believe he'd have to fight someone inferior like Roman, when soon he'd be up against someone rank 30. But he wanted to finish that quickly. He wouldn't waste his time with someone like Roman. Roman noticed that man wanted to end the battle quickly. While Chris observed what was happening, he noticed that Lord Roman's enemy was very fast. Even so, he was no match for the years of training Bake had in Murim. With that, Roman simply dodged using skill and grace. He dodged with such precision that he drew the rival's attention to himself. Now the rank 49 warrior looked at Roman with growing interest. He thought he might actually enjoy this battle, having found a rival worthy of him. Meanwhile, Roman's blade gleamed. That too caught the rival's attention. He wanted to understand the method Roman used to manifest aura. Meanwhile, Roman had been waiting for a decent battle for a long time, but he was underestimating his opponent. Now the rival would reveal his extreme 3-star aura and said he would face him seriously. As he manifested the aura, he began a show of lights and pressure. It made it hard for people to even keep their eyes open due to the overwhelming aura. Meanwhile, Roman was disappointed. He couldn't believe the man was ranked 49 with such weak power. Now he thought there was no need to drag out a battle that had been lost from the start. He watched the rival's theatrical display of lights and mana and stepped forward. He asked the opponent to block his attack, if he could, and said he would use the Heavenly Demon Sword technique. It was a kind of black wave, and the opponent thought that mana could be used in many ways, but he had never seen anything like that. Roman didn't have a specific name for those strikes, so he simply defined them by their respective numbers. That one was called Heavenly Demon Sword Technique. Third movement, he focused and prepared to unleash his power.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.